Chapter 809. Yizong's funeral was handled by Yi, and Yanjiao didn't interfere. Yi chose to bury Yizong somewhere in the forest, not in Yanjiao's hunting area. There weren't many wild beasts living in that area. After Yizong left, he left behind 2 slaves, the 4 slaves who followed Yizong to Eagle Mountain, and Grey Horse and Bat, who brought Yisu back. Altogether, there were 8 slaves. These 8 slaves were given to the next owner after the previous owner left, which was Yisu, who had not yet weaned off milk. Before Yisu could make his own decisions, Yi was in charge of him. As long as he didn't hurt Yisu, the 8 slaves would be under Yisi's management. With 8 more slaves and a child under his command, Yisi's life became busier, but still relaxed. Among the 8 slaves, 6 of them were strong and healthy. Yisi sent them to the construction site to participate in the expansion of Yanjiao's trading area. They worked as coolies, and not only did they get to eat, they could also bring more food back to lighten the burden. Moreover, Yisu still needed to drink milk. Like many children in the tribe, Yisu drank animal milk. He's probably the only child in the Yi family who grew up drinking animal milk. Yi sighed. While he was sighing, Yi saw Grey Horse and the other 5 return from the construction site. "Why are you back so early today?" Yi asked. Grey Horse and the others were very respectful to Yi. Leaving aside Yi's identity as a member of the Yi family, they and their young master's lives depended on Yi, so they couldn't be rude. Yanjiao's people seemed to have something urgent, so they stopped work early today. Grey Horse explained. Something urgent? Yi looked outside and lowered his eyelids. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he smiled and said, "It should be a good thing. Don't worry, you just need to do your job well." At this moment, inside the Flaming River Castle, Xiao Xian looked at the animal skin scroll in his hand and turned to look at Su Li, who was sitting beside him with a conflicted expression. Because of Wu He, Su Li, the leader of the Chang'e organization, had been a messenger across the sea. At that time, he had left with an attitude that said he would never deliver a second letter even if he was beaten to death. But now, the leader of the Chang'e clan sent another letter across the sea. However, unlike the last time, the letter this time came from the royal city. "Why are you looking at me? Read the letter. Hurry up and come back after you're done." Su Li was infuriated by Xiao Xian's stare. Ever since the matter with Wu He had been resolved, he had never intended to do such things again. Unexpectedly, reality had slapped him in the face. He owed Ji Fang a favor, so he had to be a messenger across the sea again. The letter was written by the current king of the royal city, Ji Fang, whom Xiao Xian had met at Gongjiaheng's place. As for Su Li's complaints, Xiao Xian, Gui He and the others ignored them. They were thinking about the contents of the letter. Ji Fang hoped that they could maintain a peaceful relationship with Yanjiao for the time being and not interfere with each other. Yanjiao was currently expanding and the royal city was in chaos. Rock Hill City was not as crazy as before, but the Yi family's incident in the royal city had disrupted the balance. Ji Fang was very busy. That was why Ji Fang hoped that Yanjiao would not do anything to the royal city for the time being. In order to prevent the Flaming Horns from causing trouble over there, Ji Fang would send someone to buy some of the slaves captured by Bai and send them back. Ji Fang asked Xiao Xian to list out the names of the tribes in the Flaming River Basin when he replied to the letter. It would be easier to buy the slaves. As for the non-Flaming River Basin tribesmen, Ji Fang would not waste money buying them. As the largest slave trading organization, the high-quality slaves in the hands of Bai were not cheap. "I've already listed all the tribes that have lost people. I'll write them down when I reply," said Gigu, who had rushed over. But Gigu had other ideas, but there were outsiders here, so he could not say more. The Yanjiao people in the room all looked at Su Li, who was sitting there impatiently. With so many pairs of eyes staring at him, Su Li couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. "What? You still want to discuss? Fine, I'll leave first." Let me know when you're done. Do you have a place to rest? I want to sleep. No matter where the Chonglis were, they would not mistreat him. Even if Su Li had to wait, he would wait in a comfortable place. He was not afraid that Yan Jiao would do anything to him. Hurry up! Su Li turned back to urge them even as he was chased out. There were no outsiders left. Only Xiao Xian, Gigu, Zheng Luo and Ao were left in the room. Do you all believe what they say? Asked Zheng Luo. He didn't believe it. No matter what you said, Zheng Luo never had a good impression of the people there. Back then, the people from King City had tried to kill them. However, in the grand scheme of things, Ji Fang's words made sense. I don't know them well, so I can't say, said Ao. But the one who gave the order to kill Yan Jiao back then was not the current king. Now that the new king has ascended the throne, he has no intention of becoming Yan Jiao's enemy, at least for now. They said they would send back the people by brought over. Gigu said. If we wait for them to buy the people from Bai and send them back, we don't know how long that would take. Ji Fang only said he would do it, but did not say how long it would take. Most of the people taken away were children who had not yet awakened. Xiao Xian understood what Gigu meant. After all, Yan Jiao was so far away from Royal City. With no one watching over them, Ji Fang would not be pressured and his subordinates would take their time. When the time came, no one knew what would happen to the children and how many of them would be sent back alive. When the Flaming River Alliance was established, the Thunder Mountain Tribe and the Drumming Tribe said they hoped Yan Jiao would bring them over one day and bring back the children they took away. After the alliance was established, Yan Jiao brought them into the forest to increase the strength of each tribe. Now, the knives were sharpened. In the 6 months that Xiao Xian had disappeared, every time the Thunder Mountain Tribe came to Yan Jiao, they would ask Gigu when they could go to the other continent to look for the missing people. Although only the Thunder Mountain Tribe came to inquire, they were representing their branch of tribes. They didn't necessarily want to search for the missing people immediately. Their tribes also wanted to search for the missing people, but they didn't have the strength to search for the missing people. If they went there rashly, it wouldn't be beneficial to their tribe. They were even prepared for the possibility that the missing people wouldn't be able to come back. They asked Yan Jiao time and time again because they wanted to test Yan Jiao and understand Yan Jiao's future plans. Speaking of which, although these tribes had joined the alliance and acknowledged Yan Jiao's position as the leader, they were still suspicious and did not fully trust Yan Jiao. Speaking of missing people, it's not just the children who were taken away as slaves, said Ao. When Xiao Xian disappeared, there was an incident at the trading point. The Drumming Tribe led a few tribes to attack the trading point. That was why Ao had brought people into the forest to look for Xiao Xian but had returned. According to normal thinking, Yan Jiao was not to be trifled with. Plus, they had established the Flaming River Alliance. Normal people would not take the risk to pull the tiger's whiskers. However, the Drumming Tribe was crazy. They would even sacrifice their lives to achieve their goals. They were a bunch of lunatics. A bunch of lunatics could not be judged by common sense. After Xiao Xian returned, he asked Ao about the Drumming Tribe. Ao only replied, "The Drumming Tribe is gone." The Drumming Tribe had not merged their fire seed yet. Ao had brought people to destroy the Drumming Tribe. The Drumming Tribe's fire seed had been destroyed by Gui Zhe. At that time, the Drumming Tribe's old rival, the Drumming Tribe, and a few other tribes in the Flaming River Valley who were skilled in martial arts had participated in the battle. However, after that incident, some people disappeared. They were not killed during the battle, they just disappeared. Even the shamans could not sense the auras of those people who disappeared. They could only sense that they were still alive, but they were very far away. There was once a travel team that said they saw some suspicious figures. Gigu guessed that they might be from the drumming organization. It was not just children who were kidnapped. Now, there might be adults who were kidnapped. This was why Gigu was cautious. Children needed time to grow up, but men in their prime could be used as coolies. This was only Gigu's guess. I think we should go pick them up ourselves, Gigu said in a low voice. Perfect, I want to see what the legendary royal city looks like. Zhengluo and Ao did not say anything. They looked at Xiao Xian. According to the rules of many tribes, other than the shamans, the leader had the absolute right to speak unless the elders joined forces to object. However, in Yanjiao, Xiao Xian was an exception. His decision alone had great influence. He could even overturn Gigu's decision. After some thought, Xiao Xian looked up. All right. Since Xiao Xian agreed, Zhengluo and Ao had no objections. The four of them discussed for a while. Xiao Xian wrote a reply on the animal skin scroll. As he wrote, Xiao Xian said, "This new king is very clear about Yanjiao's movements. Indeed. Looks like the royal city has been keeping an eye on Yanjiao. They can even guess what Yanjiao is thinking." Gigu was already on guard when he saw Ji Fang's letter. Although many things were not confidential, he had a feeling that Ji Fang had spies here. Zhengluo also decided to call the patrol leaders of the trading point over and give them a few instructions to check if there were any suspicious people nearby. They also had to check the people in the trading point. In the future, they would have to check more carefully on teams that came from afar. After the discussion, Xiao Xian called someone to call Suli over. He wrote a reply and handed it over. "Bring this to Ji Fang. Tell him that we will personally pick up our people. I hope that by the time we arrive, we will already see that the people who were stolen are safe." Xiao Xian emphasized the second half of the sentence, especially the word stolen and safe. Suli was still sleepy and angry at being interrupted, but when he heard Xiao Xian's words, he immediately perked up. There was a good show to watch. He had to go back and tell the other Chong Lis to get ready to go to Royal City. After Suli left, Gigu ordered, "Notify all the branch tribes that we have a mission." Ever since Xiao Xian divided the tribes that joined the Flaming River Alliance into different regions according to the branches of the Flaming River, it became more efficient to notify them. Every branch had a leader. As long as the news reached them, they would naturally use the fastest method to notify the other tribes in their respective branches. There was no need for the Yanjiao tribes to send people to notify them. Chapter 8:10. About 10 people had gathered in the courtyard outside the forging room. Gong Jiaren walked out of the forging room with a gleaming knife in his hand. The gleam was not the reflection of metal on other weapons, but a chilling, dangerous feeling that struck fear into the depths of one's heart. The blade had yet to be seen, but it felt like a snowy peak. Gong Jiaren was half naked, his body drenched in sweat. Due to the high temperature in the workshop, it was normal for people to be drenched in sweat. However, Gong Jiaren and the other Gongjia family members who walked out of the workshop felt a burning sensation in their hearts. It was as if they were experiencing a combination of fire and ice. Their faces were flushed from the excitement of this newly forged knife, yet they were drenched in cold sweat. It was a contradictory feeling. They could still remember the chilliness of forging in the forging room. Every time they breathed, the hot air that entered their lungs would suddenly cool down in the next moment. After leaving the forging room, every muscle on their bodies was still trembling. They were exhausted and trembling. Recalling the changes in the knife after each strike, and the way it was now, the Gongjia family members were filled with endless emotions. They ignored the exhaustion in their bodies. This was the best metal weapon they had ever forged. Before the knife was completed, they had already judged it based on their professional intuition. It was different from the rest. The new bronze weapon was made from refined copper ore and green-faced fanged beast blood. This knife was made from crystal core and the blood of the star butterfly larvae during their metamorphosis. Before this, the Gongjia family members had made many attempts. In the beginning, they followed the new bronze method to forge the knife. Due to the limited amount of insect blood, they had to conserve as much as possible during each experiment and adjustment of the ratio. Now they had finally found the most suitable combination and ratio. The knife made from the star butterfly larvae's blood, and the gold ore in the crystal core, was much better than the one made from copper ore. Why were the Gongjia family members so excited? Because even the Gongjia family ancestor who discovered the star butterfly larvae's blood only used copper ore and insect blood to forge a weapon. However, the knife in their hands was made from insect blood and crystal core. A gust of wind blew past, and the blade seemed to emit a murderous hum, causing goosebumps to appear on the necks of the people in the courtyard. It was as if a cold wind with snowflakes had brushed past them, and they could not help but shrink their necks. Gongjiaren took a deep breath and walked towards the Yanjiao family members in the courtyard, holding the knife with both hands. He handed the knife to Xiao Xian. "Let's test it." Gongjiaren's eyes shone with anticipation. Xiao Xian looked at the knife in his hand. The Gongjia family members had made this knife based on his previous one. However, it was wider by a finger, almost the width of an adult warrior's palm. The blade was silvery white with no other patterns. It was very heavy, much heavier than Xiao Xian's previous one made from crystal core. It was not suitable for other tribes, but for the Yanjiao people, it was a good weight and suitable for hunting. When he turned the blade, the sunlight reflected off the blade, causing the people who gathered around to squint their eyes. Usually, they would start with an intermediate stone, but this time, Gongjiaren tossed out a superior stone. A blinding flash of light followed by a crisp sound. Gongjiaren's rock was split into two. The cut was smooth, and there was no delay in the breaking of the rock. The blade did not bend at all. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but hold their breaths. Then, they were filled with intense joy. "Nice! Nice knife. Xiao Xian, can we use the same method you used in the desert?" asked Gigu. Xiao Xian had used his blood to ignite the knife in the desert. It was very effective against the puppet. However, Xiao Xian shook his head at Gigu's anticipation. No. The new bronze gave off a violent vibe, while the new metal weapons made from crystal cores were all sharp. This saber, on the other hand, was similar to the new bronze in some ways, but it was on the other end of the spectrum, like a collision between a glacier and a blizzard. The knife was made from the blood of a star butterfly larva. That was why human blood could not exert its full power. Xiao Xian slid a finger across the blade. The coldness of the knife did not come from the blade itself. The temperature of the blade was only slightly lower than other metal weapons in the same environment, but there wasn't a huge difference in temperature. What truly made people feel cold was the coldness in their hearts and mind. "I heard you named the knife?" asked Xiao Xian. Gongjiaren's excitement grew at Xiao Xian's question. "The knife's name is Frost Star." When the Gongjia family made a knife they were particularly satisfied with, they would name it. It was a way to express their feelings towards the weapon and to show off their work. Almost every craftsman hoped that their metal wares would become famous. Humans had a limited lifespan, but metal wares such as sabers and swords had a much longer lifespan than humans. In the future, when the person who made the metal wares passed away, the metal wares with a name would still be known and remembered by more people. At the same time, everyone would also remember the person who made the famous metal wares. This was also a continuation of the glory. Ever since Gongjiaren and the rest arrived at the Yanjiao tribe, they had made many high-quality weapons. They had been here for a long time and had forged more crystal cores. They had come across more types of metal weapons and gained more experience. Their skills had improved tremendously, and they had even found many ways to improve their skills. It was undeniable that the Gongjia family had talent in this area. They could always find suitable techniques and improve them faster than others. The cold star in Xiao Xian's hand could be considered the pinnacle of Gongjiaren and the others' skills. Whether their skills would improve in the future or whether they would be able to create better metal weapons was still unknown. However, the cold star was the metal weapon they were most satisfied with and the one they wanted to make famous the most. There was no doubt about that. Ever since Gongjiaren and the rest arrived at Yanjiao, Gigu, Ao and the other leaders had changed their weapons. Now, they were using new weapons made from crystal cores, a grade higher than new bronze. Now, what the warriors in the tribe were after was no longer a new bronze weapon, but a new metal weapon made of crystal core. However, after making so many weapons, Gongjiaren and the rest did not have the desire to name any of them. Until this knife appeared. From stone tools, horns and bones, to gold, to new bronze, to new weapons made from crystal cores, and now Xiao Xian's Frost Star. This generation of Yanjiao people had experienced 5 qualitative evolutions in their hunting tools. Frost Star. That's right. Gongjiaren still remembered the white sparks that flew when they were forging. It was as if they were standing in the cold night sky and watching the stars fly by. Because time was limited, they had only successfully created one saber so far. In fact, they had also made a few knives in their experiment. Compared to normal weapons, these knives were naturally much better. However, to the Gongjia family's perfectionist OCD technicians, these were undoubtedly failures. They had to be melted down and not used in public. According to them, it's embarrassing and damaging to our reputation. Now that they had made Frost Star, Gongjiaren and the rest had their own plans. They knew Xiao Xian was going to the royal city, and there were many Gongjia craftsmen in the royal city. What would happen if their Frost Star met the craftsmen's famous weapons? They had been forced to leave the Gongjia family. Perhaps in the Gongjia family's eyes, they were no longer important people worth mentioning. They were people who had been abandoned. They wondered how the Gongjia family members would react when they saw Frost Star. Gongjiaren was filled with anticipation. If possible, they wanted to follow them to the royal city to witness it with their own eyes. Unfortunately, they could not go. They could not go to the royal city. If they went, they might never return. They were very satisfied with their lives in Yanjiao and were prepared to spend the rest of their lives here. Gongjiaren sighed as he looked at the cloud patterns on the handle of Frost Star in Xiao Xian's hand. It was good that they did not go. When the Yanjiao people returned from the royal city, they would naturally tell them. They were confident in Frost Star, but they were not the best craftsmen in the Gongjia family. When they thought of the Gongjia family full of talents, they were still a little nervous. At this moment, a sharp bird call came from the sky. It was Gigu's snow falcon. They're here. After Gigu's announcement, the tribes that had lost people in the past began to move. The snow falcon's call was to tell them that the tribes had arrived. Because the royal city was far away, and it was inconvenient to travel by sea, there would be a limit to the number of people they could bring. It was impossible to bring all the tribesmen. In Guihe's notice, he said that the tribes would select their people to follow the Flaming Horn tribe when the time came. Tribes that worshipped martial arts and were physically stronger and more adaptable to new environments would have more people following them. As for tribes that were not physically fit for long journeys, although they would not send many people, they would provide some supplies for those who were about to travel. Everyone would help each other out. "How are things on the long boat?" asked Xiao Xian. Because they had decided to cross the sea, Xiao Xian had contacted the Longboat tribe. Now that the Longboat tribe's path to sea domination was getting better and better, the sea route had been established. If Yanjiao wanted to cross the sea, it would be most convenient for them to find the Longboat tribe. After learning that Yanjiao was heading to the royal city, the Longboat tribe also decided to go with them. They would be sailing with 3 new ships this time. The letter just arrived this morning. "The Longboat people want us to wait at the usual place," said Gigu. This was not the first time they had worked together, so one sentence was enough to know what they were planning. Chapter 8:11. The number of people Yanjiao brought this time was much more than the last time they met the Taiha tribe. After deciding to go to the royal city again, Gigu picked 1,000 people from the tribe to go with them this time. Ever since he became the chief, he rarely went on long trips. After all, he was busy in Yanjiao and Shaoxian took care of other important matters. He didn't have a chance to do anything. Now, he could finally go on a long trip. Other than Gigu, Ao and Ta were going with Shaoxian. As for Duo Kong and Zhengluo, they stayed behind to guard Yanjiao. Zhengluo and Duo Kong were from the other side of the continent. Even if they weren't familiar with the royal city, they had seen other cities. Ao and Ta were different. They grew up here and only knew about the other side of the sea from other people. They only had a vague idea of the place, and had always wanted to go and see it for themselves. This time was perfect. There were 1,000 people from Yanjiao and another 1,000 from other tribes. Gigu sent out a notice to invite the tribes who had lost people to come over. He also emphasized that there would be great risk. However, many of the tribes who came over this time didn't have any cases of missing people. Some even volunteered to go with them. Shaoxian even saw the more timid Ji tribesman. "You lost people too?" Shaoxian asked. The chief of the drumming tribe, Abuli, nodded vigorously. "Yes, we've embarrassed ourselves." "What did he say? How many are missing? Are they children or adults?" Abuli thought for a moment, his eyes flashing. My lord, the adults lost." Shaoxian looked at the other 4 Ji tribesmen beside Abuli. When they met Shaoxian's gaze, the 4 Ji tribesmen hurriedly looked down at their toes. The toes on their big feet kept digging into the ground. They looked very nervous. They probably didn't know how to lie with their chief. Shaoxian understood that Abuli was trying to find an excuse to follow him on this journey. He did not continue asking and left to check on the situation of the other tribes. Although each tribe didn't have a lot of people, like the Thunder Mountain tribe and the Drumming tribe, they only had 100 to 200 people. Even if they wanted to send more people, Gigu had already said that they couldn't send too many people. As for the other tribes, there were only a few of them. However, due to the large number of tribes that came, Shaoxian's absence, other tribes had joined the Flaming River Valley. There were even tribes from the central region that had migrated over. In total, there were more than 1,000 of them. Hence, there were more than 2,000 people from the Flaming River Valley who had left this time. There would be even more people on the longboat. Although Yanjiao also built ships, there were only about 10 ships that could sail. This time, there were many people going. After meeting up with the longboat tribe, they would borrow the longboat tribe's ship. Gan Xie decided to follow. After everyone was gathered, Yanjiao did not delay any longer and set off. The longboat tribe's main camp had already moved to the seaside. However, they did not give up on the longboat tribe's original camp. They had a backup plan. They only moved their main camp to the seaside. This time, Yanjiao's team would meet up with the longboat tribe's original camp. Then, they would head to the seaside together. When Yanjiao's fleet arrived, the longboat tribe's ships were already waiting there. Because there were not many people on the longboat tribe inland, the ships were relatively empty. Yanjiao sent some people over. The longboat's ships are faster. Shaoxian could clearly feel the changes in these ships compared to the longboat tribe's old ship. The longboat tribe's talent in building ships was similar to the Gongjiao family's talent in smithing. No one could be envious of them. Shaoxian looked around. The people in the longboat team must have brought the gems they got from the other tribes. Many tribes here didn't value gems. They only regarded them as beautiful stones and were not as attractive as animal meat and grains. Therefore, the longboat tribe could use cheap materials to trade with tribes who were willing to trade with them. Then they would transport the gems to another continent through the sea route and sell them at a high price to the people there. Then they would buy some useful things such as gold wares and other things back. The longboat tribe's impression of the slave masters was that they were stupid but rich. Since the sea route was established, the longboat tribe had made a lot of money. Back then, after the major tribes in the central region merged with their fire seeds, they all changed. Now, the richest tribe was the longboat tribe. The fleet followed the familiar inland waterway, passing through the grasslands until they reached the seaside. Because the long boat fleet came and went often, the tribesmen who lived along the waterway were shocked at first. Then, they ate and slept peacefully. However, this time there were too many ships and people. It was obvious that this was a fleet made up of more than one tribe. That was why more people were looking at them. Faced with the curious gazes of the people along the shore, the people in the fleet who were traveling for the first time had mixed feelings. Of course, most of them were excited. Those who were chosen were not ordinary people. The longboat's new base was located on the coast. There were many mountains near the coast, so the longboat tribe did not build many houses here. Instead, they chose to dig caves. The last time Xiao Xian came, he could still see some houses, and there were not many caves in the mountains. This time, there were fewer wooden houses and stone houses. However, there was a mountain that was almost hollowed out by them. There were many caves and passages in the mountain. Along the way, Xiao Xian heard from a few warriors on the longboat that they lived on the coast and preferred to live in caves because there were frequent storms. The wind was too strong. Even if the stone houses could withstand one storm, no one could be sure how many times they could withstand it. However, if they lived in caves, they did not have to worry so much. When the storm came, they would sail the ships back to the shelter behind the mountains and tie them up. Then, they would go into the caves and block the entrance. There were many ventilation holes in the mountains, so they did not have to worry about suffocation. Only the longboat people were familiar with the structure of the mountains. The terrain of the mountains was easy to defend and difficult to attack. The longboat tribe was very satisfied with this place. Otherwise, they would not have moved their base here so quickly. When the fleet arrived at the seaside port, Xiao Xian saw a few people on the longboat not far away. They were chatting and laughing with something in their hand. A fish about half an arm long jumped out of the water. One of the warriors on the longboat caught the fish firmly in his hand. With his other hand, he took out a dagger and cut open the fish's belly. He took out the organs and washed it with seawater. Then, he ate the fish that was still wagging its tail. From time to time, he would spit out a few scales and continue chatting. Looking at this series of actions, these people were already used to this kind of life. Ha ha, long time no see, Yanjiao people. The chief of the longboat tribe, Mu Fa, laughed as he came over. Because they were often exposed to the wind and the sun, the people of the longboat tribe were tanned and stronger than before. Even though they looked thin and weak, the people of the longboat tribe gave people a sense of explosive strength. Their eyes were sharp. It was not that they were against the Yanjiao people, but the many things they had experienced during the voyage had imperceptibly given them this kind of gaze. They exuded a fierce aura from head to toe. They were not inferior to the Yanjiao people who were used to hunting dire beasts. The longboat tribe today was completely different from the longboat people in Gigu's memory a few years ago. When the two were put together, no one would have thought that they were actually the same tribe. When the tiger in their heart was released, they became more dangerous. This was the true face of the ambitious longboat people. Mu Fa, who was in the prime of his life, had enough time to realize his ambitions. He had already become the leader that generations of longboat people looked forward to. He had left a thick mark in the history of the longboat tribe. When the descendants of the longboat tribe talked about the longboat era, they would definitely mention Mu Fa, the legendary leader. He had contributed greatly to the change of the longboat. Mu Fa came over to greet Gigu, then looked at Xiao Xian. Are we really going to the royal city? Although Mu Fa had never been to the royal city, he already had some understanding of it. If the Yanjiao people were to be surrounded by the slave master's army, they would be in danger. The slave master's words could not be easily trusted. What, have you changed your mind? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, of course we're going, Mu Fa said without hesitation. When are we leaving? We can't go out to sea yet. Let's wait. Why? Are there more people coming? Xiao Xian had used a straw rope to divine that this period of time was very suitable for sailing. The long boats were also ready. Excluding these reasons, the most likely reason for Mu Fa's delay was that there were more people coming. Mu Fa did not deny it. A few days ago, people from the Hui tribe said they wanted to go with us. The Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe also sent me letters saying they wanted to go with us. Since the Longboat's headquarters moved here, the Hui tribe, Tian Shan tribe on the grasslands, as well as the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe in the central region all had people following the longboat fleet out to sea. But why did they all come together this time? Chapter 8:12. The Yanjiao team waited for a few more days before the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and Eight Limbs tribe arrived one after another. They were all familiar faces from these three tribes. There weren't many of them, less than 500 in total. However, all in all, the team that was going to cross the sea this time was huge. The Flaming River Valley had around 2,000 people, the Longboat tribe had almost 2,000 people, and the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and Eight Limbs tribe had 500 people. This number didn't sound like a lot, but it was already a huge number to the people on this side of the continent. After all, most tribes didn't have as many people as this number. This time, there were more than 100 ships of various sizes that were going out to sea. This included the Flaming Horn tribe's own ships and the 10 or so ships they bought from the Longboat tribesmen after arriving here. If all the Yanjiao ships were loaded with people, there wouldn't be much space to store goods. They had to prepare enough food and water, so they still needed to rely on the longboat. However, Xiao Xian didn't expect Mu Fa to make such a big move. He used almost 80% of the Longboat tribe's ships that could sail long distances. Xiao Xian didn't believe that the Longboat tribe didn't have other ideas. Thus, under Xiao Xian's questioning, Mu Fa finally told him what he was thinking. He wanted to use this opportunity to show off and make a name for himself. He wanted to let more people know that the Longboat people could sail, that their fleet was big, and that they had plenty of experience. Secondly, Mu Fa wanted to use this opportunity to find bigger business opportunities. Their previous business deals were only with small cities and merchant groups, but this time, he wanted to interact with larger merchant groups. He heard that there were many famous merchant groups in the royal city, such as the Black Bear merchant group that Xiao Xian knew. The Hui tribe was just curious and wanted to join in the fun. The Mang tribe wanted to observe the cultural development of the slave masters from a close distance and interact with them. The Eight Limbs tribe wanted to see if the royal city's silk products were better than theirs. They wanted to learn from them and improve their own silk weaving technique. The different tribes didn't all have the same goal, but they all wanted to ride on Yanjiao's coattails. Even Mu Fa wasn't confident against the royal city, but with Yanjiao, he felt more confident. Especially with Xiao Xian, Mu Fa felt even more confident. The people they were waiting for had arrived, and the team finally set off. The route this time was different from the one Xiao Xian took to pick up the Taihe tribe. This was a route discovered by the Longboat tribe. After all, the destination was different. The last time they went to pick up the Taihe tribe, their destination was the forest, but the Longboat tribe usually went there for trade. Even if they couldn't get too close to the cities, they couldn't go too far either. After the Longboat tribe started their navigation mode, they had already opened up several routes. The route they were taking now was the most important one among the routes they had already decided on. It was also the route they sailed the most frequently. Life on the sea was undoubtedly boring. For many of the tribesmen who had no concept of sailing, this was a difficult experience, not to mention those who were seasick. Some of them were strong warriors who were good at fighting, but unfortunately, they were seasick. Fortunately, the people who came this time were carefully selected by each tribe. Even if they couldn't get used to it at first, they gradually got used to it after a while. Those who were good at swimming even had the courage to swim in the sea. The sea was different from the river. The Longboat Tribe's warriors had already warned them about the things they needed to pay attention to in the sea. As long as they didn't look for trouble, there wouldn't be a big problem. Xiao Xian took Caesar with him this time. When they set off from the tribe, because there were limited boats and many people, Caesar had to follow the boat on land. Later, with the help of the Longboat Tribe's boats, Caesar was able to get on the boat. During the voyage, Xiao Xian learned some things from Mu Fa. However, the Longboat Tribe hadn't been to the core area of the mainland, so most of the things they learned were from others. It was hard to tell whether it was true or false. With the improvement of the boats and adaptation to life on the sea, the Longboat Tribe's sailing time was much shorter than Xiao Xian expected. When they saw the land, many people in the fleet felt as if they were alive again. "That's our longboat's important stronghold here," Mu Fa said to Xiao Xian as he put away the monocular and pointed to the front. The monocular in Mu Fa's hand was given to him by Xiao Xian. Mu Fa also had people copy it, but the final product was far inferior to the one given by Xiao Xian. Therefore, Mu Fa always carried this monocular with him. This thing provided a lot of convenience for their voyage. Xiao Xian looked at the land that appeared in the distance. On the fleet, Mu Fa had already asked people to release smoke as a signal. The other side quickly responded by lighting up the smoke, indicating that everything was fine. The fleet didn't need to worry about anything else and could directly go ashore. For this stronghold, the Longboat Tribe had spent a lot of effort. Because the two continents were getting closer, more and more people knew that there was another continent besides their own. Therefore, more and more people tried to cross the sea and go ashore. At first, everyone only knew that there was a place where the two continents were almost connected. It was undoubtedly the safest to go from there. They didn't need to worry about the weather changes at sea and the huge sea monsters that would come out from the sea to tease the ships from time to time. However, because of the war between Rock Hill City and the Royal City, people avoided that place. There was even a long stretch of coastline nearby that was guarded by the army. Other organizations that wanted to cross the river had to find another place. As time passed, more and more sea routes were discovered. The Longboat Tribe was one of them. When they first arrived, they also had conflicts with the local organizations here, but they were resolved forcefully. Now, there were also some sailing groups here that knew of the longboat's existence. However, after several tests, they temporarily gave up on the idea of destroying the longboat. However, they still had to be cautious. This was also the reason why Mu Fa asked people to release the signal after seeing the stronghold. As the land got closer and closer, the people on the ship could see the situation on the shore clearly. The Longboat Tribe chose this stronghold. The environment was very similar to the new headquarters on the other side. When the Longboat Tribe chose this place, they deliberately chose a place with similar terrain and environment to set up their base. Gradually, it developed into what it was today. After arriving, the team would rest here for 2 days before heading to the nearest city. Those who weren't used to the sea would rest on land. Those who were used to life on the ship would rest directly on the ship. Xiao Xian had already understood the surrounding terrain from Mu Fa. After landing, he brought people to the forest to look for food. This wasn't a dense forest where fearsome beasts lived. Fearsome beasts were rare and there were only a few wild animals. However, at this time, they didn't need to care so much. "Xiao Xian, do you think the royal city has received your reply? Do they already know that you're coming?" Mu Fa asked. Thinking of the efficiency of the Chongli's people, Xiao Xian said with certainty, "If nothing unexpected happens, the royal city should already know. As for whether the smaller cities know, that's hard to say." Chapter 8:13. Mu Fa sat on a rock in the grass to rest. Beside him were a few Longboat Tribe members who had just returned from scouting. The rest of the Longboat Tribe and Yanjiao's team were still behind. Mu Fa had led his men to scout ahead. After all, they were familiar with the area and could judge the slightest movement. Their main goal was to see if the slave masters and nobles had made any move. According to the shortest route from the landing point to the royal city, the shortest route had to be near Chao Chiu City. The longboat tribe went to Chao Chiu City the most. As one of the 6 main cities of the royal city, Chao Chiu City was the furthest from the royal city. Even if there was any news, it would be the last to receive it. If Chao Chiu City knew that Yanjiao had come from the other side of the sea, then the others would know as well. However, the scouts told Mu Fa that Chao Chiu City was no different from usual. This worried Mu Fa. If Chao Chiu City didn't receive any news, would Yanjiao's team start a fight with Chao Chiu City? Mu Fa frowned in thought. Suddenly, he looked up, his eyes flashing. When the others saw this, they all looked over vigilantly. There were many robbers. The longboat tribe always encountered such things when they traded. The 30 or so longboat tribe members stared in the direction of the commotion. They had already smelled the scent of hate. The black mackerels, one of the longboat warriors said in a low voice. He looked like he'd smelled shit. Mu Fa maintained his sitting position on the rock, his eyes fixed in front of him. He didn't say much. The Black Mackerels were a relatively young organization. They'd only been established for a few short decades. They were a group of people who were good swimmers and had good sailing skills. They were adventurous and ruthless. In the past, the people of the Black Mackerels only traveled between some rivers and occasionally went for a swim in the sea. However, the risks in the sea were too high and there were no benefits to be gained. Thus, they had always focused on the rivers on the mainland. They engaged in river trade, transporting people, transporting goods, robbing, and so on. Of course, if that was all, the Black Mackerels would only be an insignificant character among the many similar organizations. It was not until the cataclysm that the 2 continents approached each other that the Black Mackerels seized the opportunity to rise up and participate in the voyage. They would pay a high price to send some people to the other side of the sea. Over the past 2 years, they had recruited at least 2,000 newcomers. A portion of them stayed inland to continue the river trade, while the rest seized the excellent territories on the coast. The Black Mackerels had also wanted to buy a ship from the longboat. In terms of building ships, the longboat people did have the advantage. Each ship was large enough for multiple voyages, while the Black Mackerel's ships were much inferior. This was also the reason why they hadn't really set foot on the other continent yet. Their current ships could secretly transport a few people, but if they wanted to transport precious goods or engage in naval battles, then they wouldn't have much of an advantage. Unfortunately, the longboat people didn't sell their ship. No matter how the Black Mackerels threatened or tempted them, they just wouldn't relent. When the longboat tribe was fighting for territory, the Black Mackerels had joined forces with 2 other organizations to cause a lot of trouble for the longboat. Therefore, when the Black Mackerels were mentioned, the longboat people didn't have a pleasant expression. Soon, a team appeared in the vision of Mu Fa and the others. It was a team of about 200 people. They made a lot of noise and didn't try to hide their movements at all. This was also why Mu Fa and the others were able to detect them so quickly. Yo, I was still guessing who it was. So it's you guys. In the front of the team, the leader was wearing a gray leather coat. This was not the skin of a land animal, but the skin of a fish beast in the sea. More than half of it was shark skin, which was also the favorite skin of the Black Mackerels. There were also some dark red polished beads hanging around his neck. These were all ornaments polished from bones and stones that could only be found in the sea. This person's name was Sea Sand, and he was the current leader of the Black Mackerels. Mu Fa looked at the team behind Sea Sand. There were 5 bowhorn giant bulls pulling wooden carts. The carts were filled with goods. Looking at the direction they came from, they must have gone to Chao Chiu City to make a deal. The movements of the 5 bowhorn giant bulls were too loud. They couldn't hide even if they wanted to. The bowhorn giant bulls were commonly used to pull carts in this area. They were bigger than the other bulls. The horns on their heads were like open bows. Their horns were bigger and longer than other bulls. They were easy to tame and were more docile than other bulls. They just looked scary. Looking at the goods on the 5 carts, the black mackerels had a good harvest this time. No wonder they were in a good mood. Seeing that Mu Fa didn't respond, Sand was surprised. If it was in the past, the people on the longboat would have given them a cold snort. But now, the people on the longboat didn't seem to want to talk to them. However, it didn't matter if they didn't say anything. Seeing that there weren't many people on the longboat, Sand's rough face revealed a hint of cunning. He tilted his head slightly to look at the few people beside him. They exchanged glances. They could tell that the other party was also planning to teach the people on the longboat a lesson. Sand's actions weren't subtle. He knew that the people on the longboat had seen it. He wanted to see their flustered and exasperated faces. But when Sand looked over, he realized that the people on the longboat had strange expressions. They didn't seem worried. Instead, they seemed to be mocking them. A hint of surprise flashed across Sand's eyes. The cunning smile on his face disappeared. The people on the longboat's reaction was very strange. To be able to become the leader of the black mackerels and lead the entire black mackerels to rise quickly, Sand was quite perceptive. He made a hand gesture behind him, indicating that the people on the team shouldn't be impulsive. Why were the people on the longboat so calm in the face of their deliberate malice? Where did their confidence come from? Just as he was thinking about why, a few birds flew across the sky. Moo! 5 bow-horned bulls stomped their huge hooves and cried out anxiously. The people on the black mackerels team tensed up. Be alert! Someone's coming. The smile on Sand's face disappeared. He was serious. He retracted his gaze from the sky and looked at the forest behind Mu Fa and the others. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Sand's ears twitched. He could even hear the footsteps of predatory beasts. The size of the beast shouldn't be small. Who is it? Crack, crack, crack. A series of sounds of branches breaking rapidly approached. A gray wolf's paw stepped out of the forest. The wolf's back, which was much taller than a human, easily broke the surrounding trees. The wolf's mouth was biting a bleeding deer. The warm breath from the wolf's blood-stained teeth blew out. The surroundings seemed to be contaminated by the smell of blood. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Sand realized that there was a person riding on the wolf's back. After that, another 20 or so people walked out of the forest one after another. One of them was carrying a snake that was as thick as 2 people. The snake's head had already been cut off. The person carrying the snake coiled up the snake's body and tied it with rattan grass. He swung the snake around casually, as if he was swinging an ordinary rope instead of a snake. The murderous aura that came from hunting increased even more after seeing Sand and the others. It was different from the murderous aura of the people on the longboat. It was different. It was more like the murderous aura that came from deep in the mountains where the beasts gathered. To be able to create the black mackerels and develop it into a famous sailing organization in just 10 years, Sand's eyesight was quite good. It was because of this that he was afraid and puzzled. Among the people who just appeared, there were at least 10 who could pose an absolute threat to him. This was just a casual glance. If he looked more carefully, he might find more powerful people who hid better. Who were these people? Where did they come from? What was their relationship with the people on the longboat? The more he thought about it, the stranger it felt. Sand's pupils shrank and his eyelids twitched. Whether it was the wolf that appeared or these people, they all made him feel dangerous. What made him even more nervous was the sound of approaching footsteps in the distance. There were many people, thousands of them. Xiao Xian rode on Caesar's back. He glanced at Sand and the others, then looked at Mu Fa who was sitting on a rock. He asked, "Trouble?" Sand suddenly stared at Mu Fa. Mu Fa silently looked at Sand, who was so nervous that his face was a little pale. After a few seconds, he smiled and said, "No." C-San's face twitched. He forced a smile and said to Mu-Fa, "Since you have something to do, I won't say much." C-San quickly left with his people. He even changed their original route and took a long detour. Mu-Fa watched them leave. Actually, it wasn't that he didn't want to use this opportunity to attack C-San, but if they attacked the black mackerels this time, the black mackerels would definitely attack the longboat's stronghold while they were away. The black mackerels were very vengeful. According to Mu-Fa's understanding of the black mackerels, if he let them go this time, C-San would definitely not use this opportunity to cause trouble for the longboat's stronghold. Although he didn't like C-San, C-San's way of doing things still had a bit of redeeming qualities. Mu-Fa believed that C-San, who left in a hurry, understood the meaning of his last look. At the same time, Mu-Fa secretly let out a sigh of relief. Sure enough, coming with Yanjiao this time was the right decision. The longboat wasn't without help. They could still find help. At least for now, they had a mutually beneficial relationship with Yanjiao. On the other side, C-San ran far away with his people. After confirming that no one was chasing them, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. He was unwilling to give up, but also thankful. Thankful that he didn't attack just now. "Boss, who are those people?" Someone beside C-San asked. "How would I know?" C-San said angrily. "They're definitely not from the longboat. I've never seen them before. Could it be that a tribe is migrating?" Someone guessed. In the past 2 years, there had been many tribes migrating far away from the city. It was no wonder that he was so suspicious. "No, they're not migrating." A figure floated down like a leaf and stood in front of C-San. This was the person that C-San had sent out to scout the situation. "What's going on?" C-San asked. The person didn't keep him in suspense and said, "Migrating would definitely have old, weak, sick, and disabled people, but there's no such person in this group. No matter if it's a man or a woman, they're all very healthy and strong. Even those who look thin and weak give me a very dangerous feeling." When he thought of the young man with red patterns on his eyelids smiling at him, he only felt goosebumps all over his body. The feeling of danger flashed by, but fortunately, that person didn't attack him. "How many people are there over there?" C-San asked again. "A lot. About 4,000 or 5,000. The 200 people, including C-San, all gasped when they heard this. "Then, where did those people come from? What's their purpose?" Someone felt a sense of crisis and asked. C-San narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of the sea. "Could it be the tribesmen from the other side of the sea?" "How's that possible?" someone exclaimed. However, thinking of the long-boat people's boats, this guess wasn't impossible. "But I think those people are different from the rumors." The person who came back from scouting was puzzled. "Rumors?" C-San sneered. "Rumors can't be trusted." When he first met the longboat tribe, it wasn't that C-San didn't suspect the rumors he heard, but too many people said the same thing. Moreover, only people from this side of the sea went over, very few people from the other side came over. When they were transporting people, they didn't find anything near the coast that attracted them. Over time, C-San had the same opinion as the others. He thought that most of the people over there were barbarians who didn't have enough to eat, used animal bones and horns as tools, and had never seen metal before. The longboat tribe's strength was just a special case. However, now he knew that those rumors were all F***king fake. Special case? There were so many special cases. Yes, there might be a lot of barbarians who didn't even have enough food, but they definitely didn't make up the majority of the population like the rumors said. Even if they did, they were a group of dangerous barbarians. Perhaps the reason why the people who crossed the sea from the other side of the sea didn't come back was not because they found a new paradise, but because they died. The people who came back from scouting were still thinking about the scene they saw. Those people seemed to be doing well, whether it was their clothes, the dazzling gems they wore, or the tools they used. After a moment of silence, Sand said, "Don't touch the longboat's territory for now. Tell your people to keep a distance from them and watch from afar. Don't step into the longboat's territory. Also, keep an eye on Chao City." Chapter 8:14. Chao City, City Lord's Residence. City Lord Chao Wen felt his eyelids twitch early in the morning. He had a feeling that something big was about to happen, but he could not figure out what it was. However, as the lord of a city, even if he was frustrated, Chao Wen still appeared as calm as usual. He even walked around the garden and looked at the precious flowers and trees that the slaves had taken care of so carefully. The flowers and plants in the garden gave off a refreshing fragrance that calmed the mind. That was why Chao Wen liked to think in the garden. Smelling the familiar fragrance, Chao Wen's uneasiness faded. However, he did not dare to be careless. To be able to become the city lord of Chao City and keep it safe until now, he naturally had the ability. He trusted his instinct. What was going on? Chao Wen lowered his head and looked at the lush greenery in front of him. Just as he was thinking, there was a sudden shout. "Not good! Not good, father!" A well-dressed young man panted as he rushed over. Chao Wen frowned. He had always taught his children to be calm and collected. His children usually behaved well, so why were they so rash today? "Why are you panicking?" Chao Wen's voice was not loud, but his tone was stern. He was clearly unhappy with this person's behavior. The one who rushed over was Chao Wen's eldest son, Chao Chuan, who had the highest chance of inheriting the position of city lord in the future. Normally, Chao Chuan would do his best to leave a good impression in front of his father, mimicking his father's mannerisms to a certain extent. But today he was too shocked. His usual calmness was nowhere to be found. However, Chao Wen's tone brought him back to reality. Pausing, Chao Chuan took a deep breath and quickly said, "The sentries sent word that someone is coming." Ever since the situation had changed, Chao Wen had sent a group of sentries to keep an eye on Chao City's surroundings. The moment there was any movement, they were to report it immediately. A few things had happened during this period, but they were all small problems. Hearing Chao Chuan's words, Chao Wen's brows twitched. Could this be the reason for his uneasiness this morning? "Who are they?" Chao Wen asked. I don't know." Seeing Chao Wen's frown, Chao Chuan hurriedly continued, "Although we don't know who they are, the sentry said that they might be from that direction." He pointed in the direction of the sea. "Where are they from?" Chao Kong asked curiously. "Are they tribesmen like the Longboat tribe?" From time to time, the Longboat tribe would come to Chao City to trade. Chao Wen knew this, but until now, he only knew that the Longboat tribe was an exception. He heard that the tribes on the other side of the sea were very weak, and the Longboat tribe was the strongest tribe there. The Longboat was the strongest. This was actually a boast made by the Longboat tribe when they first came. Moreover, for a long time, only the Longboat tribe traveled between the two continents, so many people gradually believed it. Chao Wen also knew that due to the influence of the war and the situation, as well as the fact that many places had begun to build cities, the slave masters and nobles had begun to buy slaves in large quantities. Some of the small and medium-sized tribes that originally lived inland had been forced to flee deep into the mountains and forests. It was difficult to find them, and the difficulty of capturing slaves had increased. Therefore, many slave trading organizations had extended their hands to the other continent, such as the largest slave trading organization, Bai. This also made Chao Wen believe that the tribes on the other side of the sea were a bunch of people who were about to become slaves. When navigation technology matured and trade became more stable, Chao Wen wanted to reach out and enslave the people on the other side, taking the gemstones and salt for himself. But now, there were people other than the Longboat tribe here? Why not just enslave them? How many? Chao Wen asked. 4. 4 to 5,000. Chao Chuan stammered. How many? Chao Wen raised his voice in disbelief. 4 to 5,000? Chao Chuan nodded vigorously. The sentries said they were all quite strong. It didn't seem like they were migrating more like they were moving with a purpose. Chao Wen opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but suddenly seemed to be stuck. His expression changed rapidly. This number, in the current environment, was indeed not a small number. 4 to 5,000 people, and not all of them were fleeing or migrating. They were all quite strong. Chao Wen came to the conclusion that they were about to attack the city. Chao Wen could not remain calm. He pushed Chao Chuan aside and ran out of the garden like a gust of wind. In Chaoqiu City, the trading team that had come from afar was busy. They were already familiar with the trading methods here. Whether it was the streets full of shops or the free trading area designated by the city lord, they could walk there with their eyes closed. They were very familiar with the daily activities and where they could hear the gossip. But something happened today. The gold-plated gates of the city lord's residence opened with a series of clanking sounds. A group of 100 cavalrymen charged out. The person in front waved his long weapon mercilessly, shouting and chasing away those in his way. Those in the city who reacted quickly retreated to the side. What's wrong? Those are the city lord's personal guards. The Chao family. Look at the two in the middle. Is that the city lord? Among the group that came out of the city lord's mansion, there were two people who were dressed differently from the rest. They were brighter and more exquisite. They were Chao Wen and Chao Chuan. Usually, Chao Wen would take a carriage, but now that he was in a hurry, he rode a horse. They're heading towards the city gates. What's the city lord doing there in such a hurry? Looking at the group of people rushing over, anyone with a bit of foresight could tell that something was about to happen. Something was wrong. After reaching the city gates, Chao Wen climbed up the tower and looked into the distance. His heart tightened. Although he could only see a few black dots, he knew that Chao Chuan was right. There were also some suspicious figures in the air. Close the city gates. Chao Wen shouted and ordered the archers to get ready. Those figures in the air were not ordinary birds. Rumble, the heavy city gates were closed. There was a group of people who had just arrived outside the city. Before they could enter, they were stopped outside. No matter how they shouted, begged, or bribed, the city gates would not open. The city lord was personally guarding it. Who would dare to open it? Not only the people outside the city, the people inside the city were even more confused. The groups that wanted to leave the city were all stopped. The onlookers also came closer to the city gate. If not for the Chao family blocking them, they might have already gathered in front of the city gates to see what was going on. Why are they closing the city gates in the middle of the day? Someone was unhappy. That's right, even if something happened, we have to know. It would be easier to escape if we knew. Everyone thought. This doesn't look good. Should we think of a way to leave first? Climb out? Everywhere is heavily guarded at this time. We can hide first. Don't guess blindly. Let's wait and see. However, these discontent and discussions stopped in the next moment. A wolf's howl came from afar. The crowd fell silent, then burst into an even louder discussion. Wolf. It's a wolf. It doesn't sound like an ordinary wolf. I can't hear it. We heard wolf howls when we were traveling, but why does this sound like? The person who spoke shuddered. Ferocious beast. An older traveler said with certainty. Their group came from deep in the mountains, so they knew the difference between the howls of wild beasts and ferocious beasts. That howl could only be made by ferocious beasts. Ordinary wild beasts would not be able to make one's hair stand on end. It was as if every nerve in one's body was tense. Caw, high up in the sky, a few eagles flew past and circled above Chaoqiu City. It's too high. It's not easy to shoot, an experienced archer said. Even if they could hit it with enough force, the distance was too far. By the time the arrows reached it, the other party might have already flown away. Judging by their reaction speed, it was clear that they were not easy to hit. That is also a ferocious beast. What's going on? What the hell happened? Is someone attacking the city? The crowd had their own guesses, and their thoughts were like wild horses that had broken free of their reins, running in all directions. At this moment, Chao Wen stood on the city gate tower, his brows furrowed so tightly that they could snap tree branches. Chao Chuan had already received orders to mobilize his men. Chao Wen looked at the approaching group, trying to guess their identities and what to do next. There were 3 large flags in the approaching group. Chao Wen recognized 2 of them. One was the flag of the Longboat tribe, while the other made Chao Wen's heart ache. Yanjiao. He recognized Yanjiao's totem because the royal city had issued an order to hunt down Yanjiao's migration team. The order had drawn Yanjiao's totem on it. Later, Chao Wen had done some research on Yanjiao. Back then, when the royal city had asked for reinforcements, Chao Wen had deliberately delayed. It was not that he wanted to help Yanjiao, but that he did not like to waste his own forces. If the royal city wanted to fight, so be it. All Chao Qiu needed to do was pretend. However, Chao Wen did not expect to see Yanjiao's totem again at this time. They really did come from the other side. Other than Yanjiao and Longboat's totem flags, the third flag was very unfamiliar. There was a strange symbol on the flag that looked like a snake. He had never seen it before, so he didn't know which tribe it belonged to. No matter what, Chao Wen only had one word in his mind: this was bad. As for the flag that Chao Wen found unfamiliar, it was not the totem flag of a tribe. It was a new flag. New did not mean that it was made of new material, but rather that it had only been made recently. Before the Yanjiao team left, all the tribes in the Flaming River Basin had received the news and rushed to the trading point. When the tribes were preparing their totem flags, Xiao Xian suggested making a flag that belonged to the Flaming River Basin Tribal Alliance. As for the totem patterns on the flag, because the Great Alliance was not an alliance of just one tribe, there were many of them and there would be more in the future. It was impossible to use a tribe's totem on the flag. Even for the Flaming Horn tribe, using the twin horn totem would attract strong opposition from other tribes. When it came to totem matters, tribesmen were very stubborn and would not agree even if you killed them. That was why Xiao Xian used a familiar symbol that no one had ever seen before: a dragon. The dragon was based on the general shape of the Flaming River that Xiao Xian was familiar with. The Yanjiao people did not object to Xiao Xian's decision. They also thought that Xiao Xian's suggestion was very good. The other tribes who came later also had no objections. Since the flag was based on the Flaming River, of course they agreed. When Xiao Xian mentioned that he would put the totems of all the tribes of the Flaming River Alliance on the dragon flag, they couldn't wait to put their totems on it. However, time was tight and they were very cautious about totems. They wouldn't draw a totem on a flag with symbolic meaning without any ceremony or preparation. That was why until now, there was only the dragon in the shape of the Flaming River on the Flaming River dragon flag. Chapter 8:15. The 3 flags represented Yanjiao, the Flaming River Alliance, and the Longboat tribe. However, there were other tribes like the Hui tribe, the Mang tribe, and the 8 Limbs tribe in the group. They didn't raise their flags not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. In fact, they also regretted it in their hearts. Why didn't they think of making a totem flag to carry? Making one on the spot? No, the totem flag had to be made with the best material. It had to be made by the shamans themselves. Only then could it represent their tribe. It was a pity that they were just here to join in the fun. They didn't even think about carrying the flags. Under the gusts of wind, the 3 totem flags fluttered in the wind, making flapping sound. As they got closer, the people on the city gate tower could clearly see the patterns on the flag with their eyesight. The unlucky group that couldn't enter the city earlier was no longer knocking on the city gates. Seeing the large group of strangers approaching, they turned around and left. Chowon stared at the approaching group and listened to his subordinates discussing their strategy. One suggested to fight directly. While the other party was tired from the long journey, they would kill them without giving them any time to rest. The other suggested to negotiate first. They had to know what the other party's goal was. Perhaps they could negotiate and avoid conflict. If this was in the past, Chowon would have preferred the latter. He didn't like to waste his troops to start a war. However, since the other party came from the other side of the sea, and there were Yanjiao people among them, they had to be careful. Chowon was very annoyed as the people around him argued. He wondered why he was so unlucky to meet them. As he was thinking, Chowon's ears twitched, and he looked into the sky. A black figure flew across the sky towards Chowon. Chowon's face lit up as he raised an arm. The next moment, the flying figure landed. It was a black bird about the size of 2 palms. When it flew, it was like a pair of elongated scissors. When it retracted its wings, it was long and thin. This was a bird used to send messages. Chowon couldn't wait to untie a small bamboo tube from the bird's leg. He poured out a thin piece of cloth. The cloth was made from a ferocious beast's silk, and didn't wear out easily. When he saw the cloth, Chowon was sure that it was from the royal city. Looking at the words on the cloth, Chao Xiang's tense face gradually relaxed. "Father, is it a letter from the royal city?" Chao Chuan, who had already mobilized his troops, ran up the city gate tower, sweating profusely. "Yes," Chowon replied absent-mindedly. Then, he carefully read the strip of cloth again. He let out a long sigh and said, "Open the city gates." Chao Chuan, who was waiting for orders, was stunned. He thought that they were going to start a war. Why did they open the city gates? Seeing Chowon frown, Chao Chuan knew that his father was unhappy again. He hurriedly shouted at the city guards waiting for orders, "Open the city gates." The city guards waiting below were also dumbfounded when they saw this result. Seeing that Chao Chuan was not joking, they looked at each other and then followed the leader. They carefully opened the city gate, almost moving the gate bit by bit, as if they were afraid that something would happen if they opened it too quickly. They looked through the crack of the gate at the approaching group outside the city. Roar! The crowd that was squeezing towards the city gate saw this and instantly exploded. They all retreated, keeping a safe distance from the city gate. Only 300 people entered the city. The rest did not approach the city gate, but waited outside. Xiao Xian led Caesar into Chaoqiu City. The others followed closely behind. The city guards did not even dare to collect the entrance fee. After Xiao Xian entered the city, he did not continue walking in the royal city. Instead, he raised his hand and gestured for the others to go buy things. Chowon still stood on the city gate tower. He did not go down because he still had not decided how to treat Yanjiao. He did not know what to say. If he was not careful, it would have the opposite effect. Thus, Chowon's strategy was to remain unchanged. After the Yanjiao people entered the city, they did not even think of greeting them. Instead, they entered the city like the other traveling groups and went to various destinations to trade. Only Xiao Xian, Mu Fa, and a few others remained at the entrance. Caesar lay next to them, staring coldly at the city guards. Xiao Xian glanced at Chowon, who was looking down from the city gate tower. Their eyes met for a few seconds, then looked away. There was no need for words. Both sides understood each other's intentions. Xiao Xian could see that Chowon did not want to fight. Perhaps he had received news, so he opened the city gate and withdrew half of the city guards. Chowon was relieved. Good. It seemed that the other party was only here to trade. He hoped they would leave quickly. The people who entered the city were led by the longboat people because of the language barrier and their lack of understanding of the city. All of them rubbed their palms together. The reason why they came directly to Chaoqiu City instead of going around was to buy things. It was still a long way from here to the royal city. They had to stock up, right? They also wanted to see the slave masters' cities. Unfortunately, after entering the city, their expectations were too high. The further they went, the more disappointed they became. Because they were familiar with Yanjiao's trading point, they were not shocked by Chaoqiu City. Instead, they felt that it was just SOSO. As for those exquisitely designed things, they were beautiful and naturally they wanted to buy them to show off. However, they were too expensive and not affordable. It was also troublesome to carry them around. The people who came with them had been to the trading point many times. Even if they were not familiar with trading, they had a rough idea of what the items were and what their prices were. But now they only had one thought: was this a scam? When they were at Yanjiao's trading point, they thought that many things there were expensive. Now, compared to Yanjiao's prices, they felt like they had a conscience. There was only a small bag of jerky here. Why was it so expensive? However, they had no choice but to come to this foreign place. If the items were not up to their standards, they could not help it. Luckily, they had money. The cities under the control of the 6 great aristocratic families had a unified currency. However, most of the time they still bartered for convenience. Before they came, the tribesmen had already learned about the prices of various gems and gems from the longboat. They were not afraid of being scammed. Plus, with the longboat people following them, even if they did not know, the longboat people could remind them. Abuli brought 3 Ji tribe warriors and 2 longboat people to a shop. This was a shop that sold food, from grains to biscuits to meat. It was also one of the shops that travel teams often visited. From a tribe to a trading caravan, then to a shop spread throughout the city. Abuli had already learned about this change from the longboat people on the way here. That was why, after a few curious glances, he did not look at the people inside anymore. Instead, he focused on the goods in the shop. Someone was moving boxes in the shop. When the person heard someone coming, he put down the box. Before he could straighten his body, he saw 3 pairs of large feet standing at the entrance of the shop. Although it was strange to see such large feet, it was not scary. Different tribes had different styles, so he got used to seeing all kinds of people. What surprised him was that these 3 pairs of feet had rough toes and wounds, just like beggars. The people in the shop thought that they were beggars who could not find a place to stay, and could not even be slaves. They were about to chase them away when they looked up. The people in the shop froze as they looked at the dazzling jewels around Abuli's neck. The sparkling and translucent crystals reflected part of the Yangguang's light, while the other part refracted the rainbow-colored light. It was very dazzling. Each of them was as thick as a child's arm. The people in the shop closed their eyes and opened them again. It was not an illusion. You guys. The words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat because he was too shocked. His eyes were wide open. Many travel teams did not show off their wealth, afraid that others would know they had good stuff. But now, the people standing in front of the shop had the aura of a nouveau riche. They did not seem to have any intention of hiding their wealth. Weirdos. Abuli did not care about the people in the shop, who were like wooden poles. His eyes were fixed on the bags of grains of different colors and shapes, as well as the dried meat that was easy to carry during travel. There were many types. Although the quality was not as good as the goods from Yanjiao, there was a lot of variety. It was dazzling. "Tell me, which one do you want?" Abuli asked the 2 people beside him. He was having trouble choosing. "That one." A warrior from the drumming tribe pointed at a type of grain nearby. The grains were plump and big enough. They looked delicious. Abuli waved his hand. "Buy that one." The other person pointed at a type of grain. Abuli glanced at it. "Buy. And this one. This one looks good too. Sigh, that one looks delicious. Buy. Buy. Buy." Abuli rarely acted like a tycoon. He knew the value of the crystals in his hands, so he bought without hesitation. He was not afraid of being robbed. There were more than 4,000 people waiting outside the city. That was his confidence. 5 shops away, in another shop that specialized in selling grains, Gigu was twirling a leather bag full of gemstones in one hand. He raised his other hand and pointed at the shelves in the shop. This one, and that one over there. Give me 100 bags of each. The people in the shop were stunned. Why, you don't have any. No, we have. Seeing that Gigu was about to leave, the shop owner hurriedly stopped him. What a joke. How could he let go of such a rare opportunity? Some people looked around and realized that there were not many things that could arouse their interest. They fell into a state of we have money, but other than food, we don't know what else to buy. There were very few gemstones on this side of the continent. Why was it like this? Why was there such a difference between the two continents? The main reason was the core seed. The reason why there weren't many gems here was because of the existence of the core seed. Even though there were many different types of gems here a long time ago, after the core seed appeared, the gems gradually changed and became metal ores. The rarer something was, the more valuable it became. When the nobles fell in love with the gemstones, the value of the gemstones also increased. Unfortunately, gemstones were hard to find. High-quality gemstones were even harder to find. Many slave owners purposely sent their slaves to dig for gemstones, but in the end, the number of gemstones they found was less than the number of slaves who died from exhaustion. However, to the tribesmen on the other side of the continent, they could wear a bunch of gemstones and play with them. If they felt like it, they could even throw a bunch out and return to nature. Because the core seed did not fall there, all the gemstones existed according to the natural laws. For example, places like the drumming tribe were rich in gemstones. They had more gemstones than food. This was also one of the methods the longboat tribe used to make a fortune. The people of Chaoqiu City, as well as the local expedition teams, had a deep impression of the Yanjiao team. They were stupid and rich. Chapter 8:16. In Chaoqiu City, on the largest street, Chu Su and a few Mang tribesmen walked as they observed the people around them. They were dressed in fine silk clothes from the 8 Limbs tribe and wore triangular jade rings made by their own tribe. The Mang tribesmen also liked to put on airs, unconsciously exuding an air of superiority. It was quite intimidating. People who didn't know better would think they were part of the 6 great aristocrat. The 2 longboat tribesmen who were leading the way didn't wear any jade, but they did wear a type of reddish-brown stone ornament. This was a stone that could only be found in the sea. It was tough and delicate and could be carefully carved. It could be considered a relatively precious gemstone, and its color looked happy. There were slave masters who had bought some from the longboat tribe at a high price. Some of the people who entered the city were also learning from others like Fan Ning, Pu Yi Yu and the rest. They were learning how to be better profiteers. In a shop selling gold wares, the Water Tiger tribe's chief, Chu Li, the Drumming tribe's chief, Si Du and the rest were in the shop. They had wanted to buy some gold wares as they had heard that there were many cheap and exquisite wares here. That was why they had asked the longboat tribesmen to bring them here. Unfortunately, they were disappointed when they scanned the shop. Naturally, the first thing they looked at was the weapons. However, after the Flaming Horns got used to the weapons made by Gong Jiaren and the others, they were no longer interested in the weapons in the shop. They could already tell the quality of metal wares and knew that some of them looked good but were actually useless. They were already carrying the new bronze wares they got from the Flaming Horns tribe. After this comparison, they gave up on the idea of buying weapons. They then looked at other gold wares, such as wine jugs, cups, cauldrons and so on. Look, these lines, these patterns, these animal shapes. The shopkeeper held up a golden bowl with animal patterns and was about to brag to Chu Li and the rest when he suddenly paused. Chu Li took out a palm-sized tiger-patterned gold plate. Chu Li had asked the Yanjiao tribesmen to make this for him. On one side was the Water Tiger tribe's tiger pattern totem, the other side was engraved with the words Water Tiger. There was also a circle of rippling patterns around the plate. The people in the shop stared at the gold plate in Chu Li's hand. With their eyesight, they could tell that this was the work of a master craftsman. Other than a few treasures in their shop, the rest could not compare to this one in terms of craftsmanship. Craftsmen's work were hard to get. In terms of craftsmanship, if the Gongjia family claimed to be second, no one would dare claim to be first. This was the difference in skills. However, most of the Gongjia family's craftsmen's creations ended up in the hands of the aristocrats. Very little was sold. The shop owner wanted to raise the price, but when he saw the item in the other party's hand, he suppressed the thought that had just appeared. They were on a completely different level. Now that someone was trying to trick you into buying a substandard product, would you take the bait? A person who had become a leader would not be so stupid. So this man was not ignorant, he had high standards. Now the shopkeeper was honest. Some people were gullible, some were not. Now they understood that these people belonged to the latter group. Who could produce a craftsman's work so casually? Whether it was Abuli or Chu Li, similar incidents happened in many places in Chaoqiu City. However, they did not plan to stay for long. They left as soon as they bought their stuff. 300 people were buying things for 4,000 people. They had to take it in batches, and they did not hire a carriage. The Yanjiao warriors could carry a small mountain of goods each. It only took them a few trips to and fro. The travelers who came and went kept their eyes on these strangers who had just entered the city. These people gave them a sense of danger. As a result, the locals did not come forward to ask about them. They were too cautious and did not dare to speak rashly. They could only observe them closely. Towards unfamiliar and dangerous people, they were always cautious. Chaoqiu City was on high alert. The 300 people who entered the city only took a stroll around the streets and then left with their goods. According to the usual practice, the guards at the city gates would selectively inspect the goods of some teams leaving the city to prevent smuggling, and the city guards also used this as one of the ways to earn extra money. The traveling teams that came and went, the small and medium-sized teams, were angry but did not dare to say anything. But today, no matter how these 300 people entered or left the city guards did not dare to say anything. They were best at looking at people's dishes, and could see the situation clearly. At this time, they did not dare to say anything. Didn't they see the city lord standing on the city gate tower? Before Xiao Xian left, Chao Wen called out to him, and threw him a piece of cloth about the size of a finger. "The king gave this to you." Xiao Xian was surprised. Then, he understood. The Yi family must have been involved to be able to predict their location so accurately. Write a letter and have Chao Wen deliver it. When the last Yanjiao man carried a small mountain of goods and walked briskly out of the city, all of Chaoqiu City heaved a sigh of relief. They did not fight. Chao Wen took a few deep breaths without anyone noticing. Chaoqiu City was the furthest from the royal city. As one of the 6 major tribes, the Chao family of the Chaoqiu tribe did not care much about other matters. Other than those who stayed in the royal city, the rest stayed in Chaoqiu City, guarding their own territory. From time to time, they would take goods from the travelers to fill their warehouses. They had heard a little about the Yanjiao tribe. The tribesmen had a lot of salt and fire crystals. They were not smart and were just a bunch of ignorant barbarians. But those people are completely different from the rumors. Chao Chuan watched the travelers leave, and felt like he had been tricked by the people who passed on the information. He did not know about those who did not enter the city, but those who did were not easy to deal with. A few of them gave him a very dangerous feeling. What was the situation on the other side of the sea? He had to go there himself to see and hear for himself. Otherwise, the news he heard from others might not be true. It could even be fatal. For Chao Chuan, who was determined to be the mayor of Chaoqiu City, This was a mistake he should not make. Perhaps he should find some time to go out to sea and take a look. Of course, the prerequisite was that the royal city had really reached an agreement with the other side. Otherwise, if war broke out, he would just stay in Chaoqiu City. Chao Chuan thought to himself. Xiao Xian did not care about what the people of Chaoqiu City said about them. He used his memory to determine the location of the royal city, and led the team there. The team would rather rest in the wilderness than in a slave master's city. Compared to Chaoqiu City, the wilderness was safer. Although they had to be on guard against robbers at all times, they dealt with 3 groups of robbers at night. Revealing their wealth in Chaoqiu City still attracted many people to take risks. The Yanjiao people never showed mercy to robbers. The next day, after dealing with another group of robbers, the team encountered a group of special people. Slave masters? Mu Fa looked at the people walking towards them. There were close to 500 people in front of them. More than 300 of them were slaves. They were chained up with special ropes and guarded by slave masters. The people Xiao Xian and the others were looking for were not among them. Most of these slaves were probably local people. The slave masters that Mu Fa mentioned were not aristocratic slave masters, but an organization that made a living by selling slaves. Judging from the direction they were heading, they were probably bringing slaves to Chaoqiu City to sell. Xiao Xian and the others had seen that the slave market was empty in Chaoqiu City. It seemed that the people selling slaves had not arrived yet. That's Qi. Mu Fa saw a very obvious symbol on the carriage pulled by the first 10 slaves. It was the symbol of the word Bai. Qi. When they heard that it was Qi, the tribes who had lost their slaves looked at them with strange expressions. They wanted to rush over and kill all the slave masters. However, the letter from the royal city said that the various cities had been notified of Yanjiao's arrival and that they would not attack them. It also emphasized that if Xiao Xian and the others encountered Qi's people along the way, as long as the slaves were not from the Flaming River Alliance, they hoped that Xiao Xian and the others would not attack them. Otherwise, it might endanger the lives of the people who were taken away. The people in Qi were not good-tempered. The slave masters who were driving the slaves were also curious about Xiao Xian's group. At the same time, they were also on guard. They did not know the purpose of Xiao Xian's group. They only recognized the flags of the Yanjiao and the Longboat tribe. This was something that they had discussed in private when discussing which tribe's slaves were more valuable. The Yanjiao people were strong and strong slaves sold well. As for the Longboat people, they had excellent shipbuilding skills and could be sold for a high price as skilled workers. However, the current situation told them that no matter how much they wanted to turn these tribesmen into slaves, they could not show it on their faces. Otherwise, they would not be able to leave in one piece. It was not without reason that Qi could become the largest slave trading organization on the continent. Their members knew how to judge the situation, and when it was time to be scared, they had to be scared. Facing those hateful eyes, the slave master sitting in the lead car looked calm and asked a routine question. "Do you want slaves? Newly arrived slaves?" "Yes," Xiao Xian said. Hearing Xiao Xian's answer, not only the slave master leader, but also the people on his side were surprised. Xiao Xian actually wanted to buy slaves? The other party's leader was also a veteran, so he reacted quickly. After being stunned at Xiao Xian's words, he quickly regained his senses and smiled. "You can choose whichever you like. The price is negotiable." Xiao Xian walked over and pointed to a thin figure among the slaves, him. The slave master leader raised his eyebrows and looked carefully at the slave that Xiao Xian had picked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said as he lifted his foot and walked over. "Why?" the slave master leader asked. "I don't like him," Xiao Xian said. The slave that Xiao Xian pointed at suddenly raised his head. Like the other slaves, he had a half-dead, lifeless old face. But in his heart he was cursing, "You can even recognize me?" Chapter 8:17. The slave master leader didn't immediately agree to Xiao Xian's request. Instead, he carefully studied the short, thin, sickly, and weak old slave. He really couldn't find anything special about this slave. As the largest slave organization, the slave masters in the organization all had a pair of good eyes. They could see which kind of slave could be sold for a high price, and which kind of slave was useless. This was especially true for those with high positions. Of course, their eyesight was better. However, as a leader, he had sold more slaves than a tribe. Yet, he couldn't see anything special about this slave in front of him. There were so many slaves being escorted this time, and more than half of them were healthy and fit to be coolies. Why did this Flaming Horn tribe member choose an old slave who didn't look special? Do you know him? The slave master leader asked. An old acquaintance. Xiao Xian didn't deny it. The slave master leader looked suspiciously at Xiao Xian and then at the slave. Indeed, many people bought people they knew, but it didn't feel right when it came to a Yanjiao. Even if they did know each other, this old acquaintance was definitely not a friendly relationship. Enemy? No matter how much he thought about it, he still couldn't figure out the strangeness of it. However, the leader still agreed. They were professional slave traders among the slave owners. Buying and selling slaves was their primary task. Since someone wanted to buy slaves, he would sell them. However, the price was a little higher. Mu Fa walked over and haggled with the other side. He had been to Chao Chiu City many times and knew the slave trade well. He knew very well what kind of slaves were worth. In the end, Xiao Xian bought the slave with a water moon stone that wasn't very bright. After the deal was done, the slave master leader took off a palm-sized, animal fang-shaped metal object from his neck. This object was called Shi-11, and it was a tool used to untie knots. When there were no metal locks, knots were simple, convenient, and low-cost locks. Even after wooden and stone locks appeared, knots were still the mainstream. Sometimes, for the sake of the safety of property, knots would be made into complicated, dead knots. Some knots could produce the effect of 9 rings. Without the help of tools, it would take at least half a day to untie them. However, with a tool like the pyrolite, it could be untied in 2 breaths of time. If the knot was the earliest lock, then pi was the earliest key. In the past, slave owners would always carry the U with them. At the same time, it was to tell others that they had slaves. Sometimes a person would wear several types of buttocks at the same time, just like the buttocks worn by the slave owners who were escorting the slaves. Some were short and thick, some were slender, some were straight, some were more curved, some were simple, some were more complex, and there were even many hollow patterns. Xiao Xian was quite familiar with knots, so he could tell at a glance that there were nearly 100 knots on the ropes that bound the slaves in front of him. Xiao Xian had never seen more than half of the knots before. Although some of the knots looked simple, Xiao Xian knew that they were not easy to untie. It was truly amazing. Different shapes are used to untie different types of knot. Wearing too many buttocks would naturally give people the impression that, I have more slaves, so I need more buttocks. Slaves were also a kind of wealth. This behavior of the slave owners was also a display of wealth. As the craftsman's imagination ran wild, new ideas appeared one after another. Some more complex and sturdy locks were born, but they were difficult to make, expensive, and very expensive. The nobles who had the means to use metal locks realized the benefits of these new locks, and gradually reduced the frequency of using knots. The more gorgeous metal locks, in addition to being useful, could also be used to decorate the facade, showing the nobility of the slave owners, and were very popular among the nobles. With sturdy locks as a substitute, the knots in daily life no longer needed to be tied. Thus, the buttocks used to untie the ropes were gradually used less, but they did not disappear. Nowadays, the pyrolite continued to be passed down, but its function continued to fade, and it was developed in the direction of accessories. The nobles continued their habit of showing off, wearing the pyralite to show their noble status as slave owners. Since the pyralite was no longer used to untie the ropes, it did not need to be so sturdy and durable. The pyralite made of beautiful gems was a good accessory, and it was more impressive. Some female slave owners would also use it to fix their hair as hair accessories. The pyralite's production leaned more towards the gorgeous appearance, and not the functional practicality. Therefore, many slave owners still had the tradition of wearing the pyralite, but the people who wore the pyralite might not really use it to untie the rope. However, there was a special group among the slave owners. The people of the pyralite organization had always been fond of the pyralite. The pyralite they wore was still used to untie the rope. When escorting slaves, they mostly used the ropes, and the ropes were also specially treated to be more sturdy. The people of the pyralite were good at making knots. If they did not use tools, it would be very difficult to untie the rope. Of course, if they used a hard and sharp weapon to cut the ropes, they would naturally be able to cut the rope. However, who would risk offending the pyralite organization by snatching their slaves? Most of the slaves who tried their best to break the ropes and escape would still be found by the pyralite organization through various means and punished in a more cruel way. Some of them were sold as food to the cannibal tribes after being squeezed dry of their labor. Very few slaves who fell into the hands of the pyralite could escape safely. The leader of the slave owners used a machete-like pyralite to untie a knot that was connected to the slave team. He held the untied rope and handed it to Xiao Xian. The other end of the rope was tied to the old slave. "This slave is yours." The other slave owners who were escorting the slaves were full of joy when they saw that the deal had been made. They felt that this deal was worth it. They had made a lot of money. Water moon stones were rare here. They could also be used for illumination and were more valuable than ordinary gems. An old slave who did not have much labor in exchange for such a gem was not bad. However, the leader of the slave owners did not have much joy on his face. Instead, he became more and more puzzled. He did not regret making this deal. Whether it was a loss or a gain, he would admit it himself. However, there was still a strange feeling in his heart. When he left, he looked back at the old slave with a crooked back several times. Unfortunately, he still could not see anything. When the slave team left and went far away and could not be seen, Xiao Xian looked at the old slave who was standing there with his head down. "Still pretending? Do you think I don't know who you are?" The others were even more curious by Xiao Xian's words. They looked left and right. They had never seen this person before. I don't know, what are you talking about?" The old slave's hoarse voice trembled as he spoke in a native dialect. Even the longboat tribe who came here had already learned the local dialect, but they were not as good as him. Gigu and the others were even more puzzled. Who was this? Could it be that Xiao Xian knew him when he came here? They had been on the other side all this time, so they definitely did not know this person. While thinking, Gigu heard Xiao Xian say, "Stop pretending, Robber 7. Robber 7? Thousands of pairs of knife-like eyes swept over. The Yanjiao people's view of robbers was as disgusting as feces. Ever since they knew that robbers came here, the Yanjiao people were excited and gloating. Now they actually saw robbers again. What an old acquaintance. Years ago, Robber 7 went to Yanjiao's farm to steal cabbages and was caught. Xiao Xian beat him down. Later, this person teamed up with other robbers to steal the green-faced fanged beast but was chased by Xiao Xian. In the end, he could only whistle for reinforcements while being demoted. Now they met again. Knowing that he could not hide, Robber 7's face contorted. Previously, when he was in the group escorting the slaves, he thought that he was a genius. Once he got into Chao Chiu City, he would find a chance to escape and piss off the Bai people. La 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 la, the victory song of the robbers, kept repeating in his heart. Robber 7 was very pleased with himself. However, before he even got to Chao Chiu City, he met Xiao Xian, his nemesis. He had already put on a disguise, but Xiao Xian still recognized him. Every time he met a Yanjiao person, nothing good happened. Robber 7 felt that he was so unlucky because he did not pay respects to his ancestors before this operation. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the old slave, who was originally weather-beaten, dispirited, and weak, gradually began to change. He was no longer stooped, his back straightened, and his shriveled body bulged like an inflated balloon. There was also a burst of creaking sounds of bones dislocating. Gigu and the others looked at the slave with surprise, confusion, and then anger. At the same time, they all thought, F***ck, it really is him. Robber 7. The Yanjiao people stretched their shoulders and surrounded Robber 7 in the middle. They laughed coldly and their eyes seemed to say, "See if I don't beat you to death." Robber 7 seemed to be frightened. He stood there in a daze, his eyes glazed over. However, Xiao Xian knew that this guy must be thinking of a way to escape. Looking at the surrounding terrain, Xiao Xian confirmed that it would be difficult for Robber 7 to escape. He asked again, "Tell me, what did you steal this time?" Thieves wouldn't hide after stealing. Others were afraid of being found out, but they were afraid that others wouldn't know. They would even show off. The more precious an item was, the crazier they would show it off. They wanted to let everyone know about it. However, Robber 7 might not tell the truth in order to protect his gains. As expected, Robber 7 did not respond to Xiao Xian's question. Xiao Xian did not rush him either. He said, "We will be going to the royal city this time. At the same time, we will bring a message." Robber 7 lowered his head and did not move. However, Xiao Xian knew that he was listening. He continued, "We will tell the people of the royal city that Robber 7 used all his effort to steal the underpants of Chaowen, the lord of Chao Chiu City." Robber 7 raised his head and looked at Xiao Xian. "This is an insult to my robbing skills. Not to mention Chaowen's underpants. He could easily steal the underpants of the people in the royal city's palace. This kind of low-level method was something that only newbies would do. Why would Robber 7 do it? He was going to be the head of the robbers. The royal city was filled with large caravans and traveling teams. This kind of entertainment news would probably spread like wildfire. Perhaps, some people who had already been harmed by the robbers would enthusiastically announce Robber 7's gains, and add some extra information to make the news more interesting. Obviously, Robber 7 had thought of many things. "Heh, you think people will believe you?" Robber 7 looked nonchalant. "You can try," Xiao Xian said calmly. Robber 7 did not say anything. If the Yanjiao people threatened him with violence, he would have made up all kinds of lies to deceive the Yanjiao people. However, Xiao Xian mentioned this, it was a matter of reputation. This was simply pouring dirty water on his reputation. Moreover, these words were not that damaging if it was said by others. However, since it was said by the Yanjiao people, Robber 7 had to be more careful. He was afraid that the Yanjiao people would slander him even more. He was preparing to increase his ranking. He did not want to be affected by this. After thinking for a while, Robber 7 said listlessly, It's the Bai people call it the leader's bone lock." Robber 7 could not help but feel proud. He had stolen it from the leader of the Bai group. He planned to use it to increase his ranking in the robbers. Chapter 8:18. A long time ago, when productivity was low, the tribesmen didn't have so many skills. The key they used was made of bones, stones, and straw rope. They were called bone locks and stone locks. Today, some people still use these names, such as the members of the Bai organization. Chief's bone lock. The crowd did not know much about this, but they could guess that it was something similar to the Qi. Moreover, it was quite special, which could be seen from the word leader in its name. "Yes," Robber 7 said proudly, "that's the symbol and proof of identity of every leader of Bai. When the new leader takes over, the old leader will hand it over to the new leader. Rumor has it that it was made from the hardest bones of a beast that no longer exists. In addition to the tools they used to untie knots, the slave masters of the Black Panther organization also had a symbol of status, similar to an identity token. Within the organization, the pendants owned by people of high rank were more complex in construction, but the complexity was not the kind of complexity that aristocrats used for ornaments, but the complexity of practicality. When making a knot, the pie could be used to make a more difficult knot to untie. When untying a knot, the pie could be used to untie the knot faster. What Robber 7 stole was the item that symbolized the leader's identity. It could be considered as a significant ******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Without it, there would be one less step in the transition between the old and the new in the organization. Although it was not as serious as the heirloom seal, no one would be willing to become a leader without the heirloom seal. They would always feel that something was missing, and they would not have the confidence to do so. No one would be able to tolerate it being stolen. "Did you really steal the chief's bone lock from Bai?" the others asked suspiciously. "Of course, I stole it from the leader of Bai C." Robber 7 was dissatisfied with the crowd's suspicion. How powerful was he? These people actually doubted him. "You hid among the slaves to avoid C's pursuit?" Xiao Xian asked. Yes. Not only did Robber 7 not feel cowardly about his escape, he even felt that he was smart. C would never have thought that he would hide in the group that was escorting the slave. Robber 7 had lost twice to Xiao Xian and was even demoted. If it weren't for the fact that some of the people in front of him had died, he would have been demoted to 8. Humiliation. Later on, due to the cataclysm, the two continents were brought closer together. The robbers shifted their target to this side and targeted the nobles. Due to his previous failure, Robber 7 had carefully analyzed and tried his best to improve himself. He even learned how to change the smell of his sweat. In other words, he could perfectly imitate the smell of others. This was also the reason why he could avoid the tracking insectoids with a keen sense of smell. However, he had no idea what method C was using to track him down. Even without any trace of his scent, he was still able to catch up, albeit a little slower. Robbers were good at disguises. When Robber 7 was escaping from C's pursuit, he decided to sneak into the group of slaves. That way, he managed to evade a few waves of C's men. C was unwilling to make this matter public, so he sent out his trusted aides, who held relatively high positions in the underworld. Even the leader of this troop had to bow and scrape at the sight of them. Unfortunately, it was not without reason that it was dark under the light. Every time he saw a wave of people pass by, Robber 7 would feel proud of himself, thinking that he was a genius. One night, the old slave passed away due to illness. Robber 7 found an opportunity to spread the poison on the other slaves nearby. Then, without anyone noticing, he moved the old slave's corpse away and disguised himself as the old slave. According to Robber 7's plan, he planned to escape after sneaking into Chao Chiu City and hide in a sea of people. The more crowded a place was, the more advantageous it would be for him. However, he didn't expect to fall into the hands of Yanjiao again. Robber 7 still couldn't believe that he had fooled the people in the palace, the leader of the #1 slave trading organization, Bai. Those experienced slave masters couldn't see anything special about him, and yet he had fallen into the hands of the same person 3 times. He decided that he would run away the next time he saw Xiao Xian. He couldn't count on any luck. Robber 7 chose to tell the truth because he hoped that Yanjiao would spread the word of his glorious deeds. Secondly, he had already thought of a way to escape. First, he would lead the Yanjiao out to search, then find a chance to slip away. "Where's the item?" Gigu asked. "Where's the leader's bone lock?" "Here it comes." Robber 7 was about to answer when Xiao Xian said, "Don't listen to his nonsense." Get a few men and strip him. Robber 7 was speechless. Wait a minute. Shouldn't he have told the Yanjiao that the item was hidden somewhere? Then the Yanjiao would let him lead the way, then he would lead the Yanjiao to search for it and finally find a chance to escape? But now, things were going the wrong way. Robber 7 was restrained by the men around him. Even if he had 3 heads and 6 arms, he wouldn't be able to escape. Robber 7 was about to argue when Xiao Xian came over with a knife. The reflection of the knife's blade reflected Yang Guang's piercing cold light, scaring Robber 7. Wait! You can't kill me! Robber 7's mind raced as he shouted. Then you can do it yourself. Take out the item hidden in your abdomen, Xiao Xian said. Robber 7's mind was full of wicked ideas, but he couldn't think of a way out. Xiao Xian's words left him speechless. What? Robber 7 stuttered. Xiao Xian pointed the tip of his knife at Robber 7's abdomen. Take out the item here. Are you going to hide it and lay an egg? Robber 7 gritted his teeth. How did you know? The men around him were confused, but they quickly reacted. Robber 7 was hiding something. The men around him looked at Robber 7's abdomen. Knowing that he couldn't avoid it, Robber 7 didn't have the mood to chat anymore. His expression was gloomy as he moved his arm. Let go, I'll do it myself. The man holding Robber 7 let go. Robber 7 moved his finger and a piece of bone the size of a fingernail appeared in his hand. The edge of the bone was sharp. The man who held Robber 7 felt a chill run down his spine. If Robber 7 really went all out, he would be the first to die. He was too careless. Robber 7 didn't care about what the others thought. He was only thinking about how to protect his loot. Robber 7 used the small piece of bone to draw a line the length of a finger on his abdomen. It was so shallow that the men thought it wouldn't even break his skin. However, they realized that the shallow cut was getting bigger and bigger. Robber 7 used his finger to pull out a piece of skin that looked similar to human skin. Camouflage. In order to increase the success rate of every attack, the robbers had mastered more and more camouflage technique. Now, they didn't just rely on physical changes, they also relied on external aid. When the fake skin was revealed, there was a dent in Robber 7's abdomen. In the dent was a palm-sized object that looked like a beast's tooth. Caw! Could this be the chief's bone lock? Gigu guessed. For Robber 7 to be so protective of it, it must be something extraordinary. Furthermore, Robber 7 had said that he stole the chief's bone lock from C, the leader of the Bai organization. The possibility of it being the chief's bone lock was high. So that's where he hid it. No wonder he kept bending over. Wasn't he afraid of getting hurt? Ao asked. Even if the claw wasn't as sharp as a blade, it still had a curved point. It wasn't safe to wrap it up in something. If the organs in the abdomen were to get hurt because of the hidden object, it would be dangerous. After all, there weren't always witches out there to save him. Robber 7 pursed his lips and remained silent. In the eyes of others, Robber 7 had gone all out to hide the object. However, Xiao Xian could see through his special vision that the body structure of a robber was different from others. When Robber 7 hid the object, his abdomen had 4 more pieces of bone than others to protect his organs. Robber 7 had considered many factors before he dared to steal the object. People who couldn't think of robbers in a normal way had their body structure designed to be better camouflaged. At the same time, they could protect themselves. Even if their bones were dislocated, their muscles were compressed, and their organs moved, it wouldn't affect them at all. Many organizations here were formed by people of different backgrounds. However, the robbers had a common ancestor. Due to their bloodline, they were born with the advantage of camouflage. However, there were also differences between different individuals. Just like Robber 11 and Robber 12 that Xiao Xian had seen before, they were slightly inferior to Robber 7. Robber 7's body structure was better than Robber 7's. In the future, Robber 7 might really become one of the top 3 robbers. Moving his gaze away from Robber 7, Xiao Xian took the chief's bone lock from Robber 7's hands. Robber 7 couldn't bear to let go and gripped the chief's bone lock with a pained expression. The chief's bone lock was similar to the ka worn by other slave owners. Its general shape didn't look too different, but there were more hollowed-out patterns and a few more curved arcs at the edges. The sharp end still retained the shape of a beast's tooth, while the blunt end was carved into the shape of a beast's head. When he met the pair of clearly vaguely carved beast eyes, he could clearly feel the pressure coming from the bone lock. Even if that life form had already died and this bone had been artificially carved, anyone who saw it would still be able to feel the ancient and majestic aura at first glance. The reason Xiao Xian could recognize Robber 7 at first glance was because of this chief's bone lock. In his special vision, this thing was very bright, and the skeletons of the slaves and slave owners paled in comparison. It was like the only star in the hazy night sky. Xiao Xian couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. Of course, when he saw this thing on the body of an old slave who looked like he was about to die, it was puzzling. In fact, Robber 7's disguise had improved a lot compared to before. At first glance, even Xiao Xian couldn't recognize him from the crowd. However, with this chief's bone lock, Xiao Xian took a closer look and found some clues. Ever since he came out of the strange spiritual world of the Yi family, Xiao Xian noticed that he could see the different fire seeds fused in different people. Everyone's fire seeds were different, just like fingerprints. No matter how well Robber 7 hid, Xiao Xian could still recognize him after he took a closer look. Gigu and the others were curious about how Robber 7 managed to steal the chief's bone lock from C. However, Robber 7 would never answer such questions that involved technology. "Xian, what do you plan to do with this thing?" Gigu asked after he took the chief's bone lock from Xiao Xian and studied it. "Take it. When the time comes, we'll negotiate with C. If they can't come up with something satisfactory, they can forget about getting it back," Xiao Xian said. Gigu nodded. He had the same idea. The chief's bone lock was indeed a good item. Its hardness was so strong that even new bronze might not be able to leave any obvious marks on its surface. Moreover, the greatest use of this item was to tie and untie knot. However, to C, it was much more important. Instead of keeping it for themselves, they might as well use it to their fullest potential and negotiate with C. C and Robber were like mosquitoes and bedbugs in the eyes of the crowd. No one liked them. If they could steal something from Robber 7 and negotiate with C, it couldn't be any better. Seeing that the Yanjiao had no intention of returning the item, Robber 7 truly felt like he had nothing left to live for. His plan to get into the top 3 would have to be postponed. No. He couldn't give up so easily. Robber 7's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to get the item back from Yanjiao. When he was first captured by Xiao Xian, Yanjiao had to negotiate with him before letting him go. "Wait!" Robber 7 called out to Xiao Xian and Gigu. He stared at the chief's bone lock in Gigu's hand before turning to Xiao Xian. "I'll give you a piece of information in exchange." "What information?" Gigu asked curiously. He wanted to hear what Robber 7 had to offer in exchange for the chief's bone lock. "It's definitely worth it to you. If I tell you this information, you have to return it to me. It's useless for you to keep it anyway. It might even cause trouble," Robber 7 said. "You first." Xiao Xian looked at Robber 7. "No, you have to agree first. I'll tell you later." "Then forget it." "Wait. What's the rush?" Robber 7 spoke urgently as he spoke to Xiao Xian. He was afraid that Xiao Xian would leave if he was too slow. "I know you're here for the lost tribesmen. I can give you an important piece of information about Pyrolite in exchange. It might help you negotiate with Pyrolite and Royal City." Pyrolite and Royal City. Xiao Xian and Gigu keenly noticed the hidden meaning in Robber 7's words. "How did you know about such important information?" Gigu asked. Robber 7 said confidently with an unconcealable smugness, I overheard it when I was stealing. Robber Seven's outlook on life was that stealing wasn't wrong, it was glorious. Gigu fell silent. He glanced at Xiao Xian and saw Xiao Xian nod. He waved his hand and signaled the others to leave, leaving only Gigu, Xiao Xian, and Ao. Chapter 8:19. When there was no one else around, Gigu turned to Robber 7. Speak. If it's worth it, we'll return it to you. Really? Robber 7 looked at Gigu suspiciously, then at Xiao Xian. That's only if it's worth it, or else. It's worth it. Definitely worth it. Even if it's not, I can give you some other information, such as what kind of person C is. After Robber 7 suffered at the hands of Yanjiao, he would be well prepared for every operation. This time, he had done a lot of preparation to steal C's things. Seeing that Gigu and Xiao Xian had agreed, Robber 7 ignored Ao's frown and told them what he knew. C is close to the new king of the royal city, Jifang. Robber 7's first sentence shocked Gigu and Ao. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, wasn't too surprised. It made sense for a slave owner to be close to a slave trader. However, from Robber 7's tone, C and Jifang were working together. Perhaps Jifang's success in seizing the throne was also due to C's help. Participating in the fight for the throne was bound to bring many benefits. No wonder Bai could become the largest slave trading organization. You're saying that it was Jifang's order to capture slaves from our side? Ao's eyebrows were almost raised. No. Robber 7 shook his head. According to what he overheard, it was C's order to capture slaves. After Jifang found out, he called him over and told him to bring all the people from the Flaming River trading point here, and not to sell them. C didn't seem happy about it, but he didn't refuse. I knew you were coming because I overheard it. Robber 7 didn't expect Yanjiao to come from Chaoqiu City. If he had known, he would have stayed as far away as possible. You want to trade this information with us? Xiao Xian asked. What's the rush? There's more. Robber 7 scratched his head and continued, let's talk about Jifang. Other than his many helpers, there's another important reason why he could seize the throne, his sword. Sword? Xiao Xian was confused. Not bad. One of the main reasons why the Ji family could become the leader of the 6 major tribes in the royal city and sit on the throne was because of their swords. If this had happened 1,000 years ago, many people would have known that the Ji family's sword was known as the king's sword. The aristocrats' swordsmanship actually originated from them. Isn't the Ji family's sword made by the Gongjia family? Gigu asked. He understood this from Gongjiaren. No. Robber 7 glanced at Xiao Xian and the other two with an I knew you wouldn't understand look. This was something he had investigated before he made his move. He had also learned a lot of secrets through various channels. Before the Gongjia family appeared in the royal city, the Ji family's swordsmanship made them the leader of the 6 tribes in the royal city. The other tribes feared them. Of course, the Yi family was an exception. The Yi family did not have such intentions. The other 4 tribes were no match for the Ji family in terms of martial prowess. That was why the Ji family was crowned king. Now, the Ji family's advantage is even greater. The only threat to the Ji family, the Yi family, has been crippled. The Yi family is now divided by internal and external problems. Other than a few puppets, there are not many people left in the family. The 6 aristocrats of the royal city should now be called the 5 aristocrats of the royal city, Robber 7 sighed. Let's not talk about the Yi family first. Let's talk about the Ji family's swords. Could it be that the Ji family's swordsmanship is better than the Gongjia family's? Gigu placed great importance on this question. As for the Yi family, he had already heard some predictions from Yizong. That was why he was not surprised to hear about the Yi family's result. That's not it. In terms of skill, the Gongjia family is better. However, The Ji family's swords can break the swords of some of the Gongjiao family's blacksmiths. The reason is that the Ji family uses blood to make their swords. The Ji family's blood can make swords. Make swords with human blood? This time, even Xiao Xian was shocked. He always thought that only the blood of a few special beasts could be used to make swords. Who would have thought that human blood could be used to make swords as well? Anyway, Xiao Xian's own blood could not do it. With the core seed, they had a gold mine. Plus, their own blood could be used to make swords. With their logistics, they had large fields of grains. One could only imagine how powerful the Ji family was. But Robber Seven's tone was strange, his expression perverted. The glorious history of the Ji family, where everyone could make swords, is long gone. After the Ji family established the royal city, there were people who could not make swords with their blood. Robber Seven was so excited to talk about other families' dirty secrets and gossip that his spittle almost landed on Xiao Xian and the other two's faces. However, if what Robber Seven said was true, it was quite interesting. When the situation first appeared, they were all in doubt and self-doubt. However, gradually, they realized that more and more people in the family were in the same situation. In the end, in order to maintain the glory of swords, they lured the Gongjiao family into the royal city. It could be said that the Ji family was the main reason why the Gongjiao family was able to establish a foothold in the royal city so quickly. Since their blood could not be used to make swords, they would let others make better sword. After all, they had to carry a sword with them. It was a tradition. However, although it was over, many people still felt sorry for the Ji family's ancestors. Perhaps the Ji family's ancestors were reflecting in their graves. How could they have given birth to a bunch of useless people? Perhaps they were not even his children. The Ji family used their blood to make swords, that was how they became royalty. How could there be a bloodline that could not be used to make swords? What a disgrace, what a disgrace! Ridiculous, ridiculous! The Ji family suspected that their bloodline was tainted, but they would not embarrass themselves in public. They still maintained their kingly demeanor, but they lacked a sense of confidence. Very few people knew about this secret because the Ji family purposely kept it a secret. In the past 1,000 years, the number of Ji family members who could use their blood to make swords could be counted with 10 fingers. However, these swordsmiths were taking a huge risk. They had to let their blood out to make swords, which meant they were weak. Once they were weak, it would be easy for others to take advantage of them. If they were not careful, they could leave behind serious injuries in their bodies. At the same time, once they succeeded, there would be less resistance to inheriting the throne. Ji Fang once went to Gongjiaheng, hoping that he could forge a satisfactory king's sword. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. In the end, Ji Fang used his own blood to forge the sword and was almost assassinated because of it. Robber Seven told him everything he knew. Ji Fang's usurpation of the throne must have caused some opposition in the family. However, when the king's sword appeared, no one said a word. This sword was the proof of royal blood. No matter how despicable Ji Fang's usurpation of the throne was, no matter how many tricks he used, once the sword appeared, the entire Ji family fell silent. The Ji family hated the Yi family. They could have divined the location of the star butterfly, but they were worried that the Ji family's power would harm them. That was why they did not perform the divination until Yi Xiang's incident happened. After the Yi family's incident, the Ji family was the first to attack them. Xiao Xian remembered meeting Ji Fang at Gongjiaheng's place when he went to the royal city. Ji Fang seemed to have gone there to ask for a sword but failed. Heng could not make a sword of Ji Fang's standard. According to Robber Seven, Ji Fang must have started the sword not long after Xiao Xian left. He had to be careful when facing Ji Fang in the royal city. There must be something special about the king's sword. What about Si? Tell me about the leader of Bai Si. What kind of person is he? Asked Xiao Xian. Si. Robber Seven's high spirits were dampened. Si, to many people, means death. No, it's worse than death. He's the leader of the slave traders. In his eyes, there are no nobles, no tribes, only the value of slaves. There is a term in the Bai organization called provincial people. No matter what this term means in other places, in the Bai organization, its meaning is to examine whether a person has the possibility of becoming a slave and how much he or she is worth. It was like looking at meat on a chopping board with a critical eye. C wears black and has a long cross staff. There's a knife at the end of the staff in the shape of a horizontal bai. The carving on it is an eye. Robber 7 picked out everything he knew about C and only stopped when his mouth was dry. He looked at Xiao Xian and the other two. I spent a lot of effort to gather this information. Hurry up and return it to me. No, it's not worth it. Xiao Xian looked at Robber 7. Tie him up. Ignoring Robber 7's hysterical curses, Xiao Xian ordered someone to stuff a piece of animal skin into Robber 7's mouth. He turned to Gigu and said, "Take the others and continue forward. I'll meet C." "You want to use Robber 7 to lure C here? Will C really come?" asked Gigu. "C will be here soon." Xiao Xian crushed the knotted straw rope in his hand and scattered it. Gigu wanted to say that he would stay as well, but considering the large group, he swallowed his words. In the end, other than Xiao Xian, Gan Xie, Thunder Mountain Tribe's leader Lu Zhai, Ji Tribe's leader Si Du, Water Tiger Tribe's leader Chu Li and Long Boat Tribe's leader Mu Fa remained. They all wanted to meet the legendary leader of the largest slave trading organization, C. Robber 7's mouth was gagged and he was trapped in a cocoon. Only his head was exposed. At first, he wriggled left and right, but now, he was calm. The sun gradually set and the sky darkened. The night breeze carried a faint chill. Robber 7, who was about to be turned into a cocoon, was thrown onto a large rock on the grass. He didn't scream or struggle, he just looked up in silence. His eyes were focused on the sky, as if he was a philosopher pondering the mysteries of the universe. Who am I? Where am I? What do I want to do? Clang, clang, clang. The sound of chains rang under the night sky, attracting everyone's attention. Xiao Xian sat on the rock and looked in the direction of the sound. In the distance, a figure appeared. His black cloak fluttered in the wind. He held a long sickle-like object in his hand. He looked like a grim reaper walking out from the night. Chapter 820. C. Even though Mu Fa had never met the legendary leader of the Bai organization, C, he had heard of C's appearance from others. Ever since C became the leader of the slave organization, C's name had spread far and wide. Mu Fa had even heard that in some of the larger cities, many people used C's name to scare children, saying that disobedient children would be captured by C. Mu Fa had also heard from some slave traders that those words might not be lies. As for the scythe-like object in C's hand, it was actually a long handle with the word 10 on it. At the top of the handle was a sharp weapon in the shape of a beast's fang. Unlike the other katanas used to untie knots, the one on the top of C's long handle looked more like a katana than a larger katana. It was made of metal with sharpened edges. Under the night sky, it glimmered with a cold glint as C moved. The scythe at the top of the long handle had an engraving of an eye, representing the people of the province. Looking at the engraving, one would feel as though one was being watched, like a piece of meat placed on a chopping board while the other party was measuring one's worth. Mu Fa sized up this slave leader who could scare children to tears with just his name alone. His vigilance grew. Lu Zhai, Si Du, Chu Li and the rest were also on high alert. After C appeared, Robber 7, who was tied up like a cocoon, glanced over before continuing to study the night sky. It was as though he couldn't feel C's murderous gaze. He was as calm as ever, at least on the surface. Xiao Xian glanced at C, then turned his head to scan his surroundings. Other than C, there were others. Clang, clang, clang. under the moonlight, following the sound of hurried running, 6 slender figures in black robes with half-masked faces appeared. Each of them held a chain in their hand. The clanging of the chains shone with a cold glint. The 6 of them split into 2 sides, with 3 on each side. Together with Si, who had appeared first, they formed a semicircle, while Xiao Xian and the rest stood in the center of the semicircle. The formation of these men in black gave everyone a familiar feeling. It was as if they were about to surround and hunt. However, the Yanjiao people surrounded and hunted ferocious beasts, while the Hughes surrounded and hunted the hunters. Mu Fa had heard of a saying before: no one who had been bound by these chains had ever managed to escape. Si and the other 6 stopped at a distance of 50 steps away. Their gazes were icy cold, and the temperature around them seemed to have dropped because of them. Their icy gazes swept across Xiao Xian and the others, and finally stopped at Robber 7. It was as if they were frozen in ice, and their gazes were as sharp as knives, as if they wanted to slice off Robber 7's flesh. It was impossible for Robber 7 to not notice such intense stares. However, Robber 7 continued to stare at the night sky, ignoring Si and the others. He pursed his lips indifferently. The men holding the chains were Si's trusted aides, and they were also the ones who had hunted Robber 7 down. To Robber 7, these people had been looking for him for so long, and yet he managed to escape so easily. They were nothing to worry about and were all useless. Instead of thinking about these useless fools who had rushed over, he might as well think about how to escape. Si's cold, murderous gaze shifted from Robber 7 to Xiao Xian and the others. He frowned in dissatisfaction. "Where's the thing?" His voice was like the friction of cold chains, sending chills down everyone's spine. Robber 7 stopped playing dead and rolled his eyes at Si. "Don't ask me." He then pointed at Xiao Xian with his lips, signaling Si to look to the side. Si's brows knitted together, and his aura grew colder. He could sense that the stolen bone lock was no longer here, but when he followed the trail, he bumped into this group of people. His chilling gaze was no longer on Robber 7, but on Xiao Xian, who was leading the group. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was about to unlock his shackles and lock them onto his target. Yanjiao. Although his tone was doubtful, Si's words had already confirmed his suspicions. Si looked at the other 5. Other than Xiao Xian, none of them were Yanjiao, and their identities were different as well. However, Si's gaze lingered on Ganqie for a little longer. The other 4 were easy to deal with, including the only Yanjiao person present. Si did not find anything special about them. The only one that puzzled him was Ganqie. Based on his judgment, this person should be a dead man. It was strange that he did not understand. However, the most important thing right now was to retrieve the stolen bone lock. Everything else could wait. Due to the fire seed, there were always some strange tribes that stood out from the rest. Perhaps that dead man was one of them. Si wondered if he could take a beating. If he could he be sold as a slave for a high price? Due to his profession, Si's first thought was still the value of this person as a slave. After a brief moment of contemplation, Si looked at Xiao Xian. He knew that this group was led by Yanjiao, so he still had to keep an eye on Yanjiao. "Did you take it?" Si asked. Without waiting for Xiao Xian's reply, he continued, "Hand it over." He did not give Xiao Xian any chance to explain. He only wanted the item, and did not want to hear any nonsense. "It's not here," Xiao Xian replied. "Of course I know it's not here. What I'm saying is, you bring it back to me. Or else." With a flick of his wrist, a blinding light flashed. The razor-sharp edge of the Shi blade was pointed at Xiao Xian's position. "Or else what?" Xiao Xian retorted. "Or else, all of you will be captured and turned into slaves," Si said in a cold voice. Just as Robber 7 had said, the members of the Shi organization continued the tradition of the people of the province. In other words, they viewed everything as slaves. Generally speaking, they would not attack free people. The so-called free people were those who had left their tribe and were not part of any organization. They were free people who moved about freely. However, if they came across a free person who they deemed to be valuable, they would turn them into slaves. This was also the reason why many people were wary of she. Of course, during special times, such as when the slave trade was in short supply, they would deliberately attack the tribes. Attacking the tribes on this side of the continent might cause some trouble, but if they attacked the tribes on the other side of the sea, the trouble would be much smaller. Did they not know that the Yanjiao tribes were difficult to deal with? Of course they did. Before they attacked, they had done a preliminary investigation. For safety's sake, some of them even attacked the tribes around Yanjiao. However, they had underestimated the Yanjiao tribe's capabilities. They did not expect Ji Fang to personally order them to attack Yanjiao's territory. How could they just let a captured slave go? This was not in line with Xi's style. However, Ji Fang was the one who said it. Although Xi was dissatisfied, he would not destroy his partnership with Ji Fang over such a small number of slaves. Now, however, things had changed. Since they had encountered Yanjiao and they had something that belonged to them, Ji Fang had no say in this matter. Xi's style was to bite and not let go of any meat they touched. Even if they could not capture them, they would make them bleed and let them know the power of the number one slave organization, Xi. The cowardice of others was their glory. Mu Fa looked at Xi suspiciously, confirming that Xi was not joking. Did they really dare to defy Ji Fang's orders and attack Yanjiao? Mu Fa turned to Xiao Xian, wanting to see the reaction of the Yanjiao Grand Elder. However, he did not see anything out of the ordinary from Xiao Xian's expression. He only felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. "Capture me." Xiao Xian's tone was calm, as if he was just casually asking if the other party had eaten. There was not a hint of anger on his face. However, Robber 7, who was not far from Xiao Xian, shuddered violently. Then, Robber 7 became excited again, laughing maniacally in his heart. "Ha ha ha ha." He said it. Xi really did say it. Just when Robber 7 thought he was the biggest thorn in Yanjiao's side, just when he thought his future was bleak, an idiot who could draw more hatred than him popped up out of nowhere. How could Robber 7 not be excited? Robber 7 knew that the tribesmen did not like the term slave. Back in the day, the few major tribes had fought a battle of wits and courage with the slave masters of the desert. Xi's words just now had drawn a lot of hatred. He looked at the few people beside him. They were burning with anger. Chu Li's fists were clenched so tightly that they cracked. Lu Zhai and Ci Du's faces were pulled long. Gan Xie was still the same. He did not get angry. Instead, he was curiously sizing up Xi and the men in black with chains around him. Robber 7's mood began to brighten. After being captured by Yanjiao, he had said everything he needed to say. He even cooperated and acted as bait here. The reason he was so straightforward was not only because he was afraid of Xiao Xian, but also because he wanted to find an opportunity to slip away while Yanjiao was negotiating with Xi. After all, the Yanjiao did not like the slave masters who captured tribesmen as slaves. However, he did not expect Xi to be even crazier than he expected. Yes, in Robber 7's opinion, anyone who dared to tell Xiao Xian to capture you as a slave was a lunatic. Robber 7 raised his head to look at the night sky. The stars were shining brightly tonight. It was a good time to get out of here. Chapter 8:21. Actually, Xi had wanted to make a move on the Yanjiao tribe for a long time. Back when the Yanjiao tribe was still deep in the forest, their presence was insignificant and the Bai people rarely went deep into the forest to tangle with the other tribes. However, after the Yanjiao tribe's great migration, they made their presence known and attracted the attention of the Bai people. Other people might think that a powerful tribe was too troublesome to deal with, But the Bai people were different. In the eyes of the Bai people, the more powerful the tribe, the more powerful the people, the higher the value of the slaves. Their way of looking at people was to measure the value of goods. The people of the Feather tribe would be proud of catching a bird with beautiful feathers and would flaunt it. The Bai people would also flaunt when they sold a slave at a high price. Moreover, the higher the rank of the slave master, the higher the standards of the slave master. They would not be interested in normal people, but for a leader like C, it was fine if they did not make a move, but once they did, it would have to be at the level of a tribe leader. However, Ji Fang's warning made C hesitate for a moment. He did not make a move immediately. Instead, he raised the arm that was not holding the she blade and pointed at Robber 7, who was tied up like a cocoon. He said coldly, "Give him to me and I'll take his life." Having his chief's bone lock stolen was C's greatest humiliation. C could still track down the stolen bone lock through certain means. As for Robber 7 who stole the bone lock, of course he would not let him go. At the same time, C also felt that if Robber 7 died, no one would be able to steal the bone lock from him again. He did not think that anyone had the ability to do so, not even the tribesmen in front of him. Therefore, Robber 7 must die. If he died, he would no longer be a threat and no one would be able to make him feel this humiliation. Sensing the murderous aura, Robber 7 did not move, but Chu Li and the others were already nervous. They gulped and looked at Xiao Xian. Seeing that Xiao Xian did not move, they continued to remain silent. Robber 7 looked at Xiao Xian. He would be lying to himself if he said he was not afraid. He knew that Xiao Xian was in charge of this group of people. He also wanted to see what Xiao Xian would do, but he was more worried that Xiao Xian would kill him on the spot. Seeing that there was no response, C glanced coldly at Xiao Xian and the others. "You're not handing it over?" As his voice trailed off, C waved his arm and black shadows the size of fingernails shot out from his wide black sleeves. They flew into the bushes and headed straight for Xiao Xian and the others. So, the grass in the path of the black silhouettes that shot into the grass was cut in half. The cut grass flew up and sprayed out from the ground like countless raindrops. As for the black silhouettes that were thrown out, they crashed into the ground, not far from Xiao Xian and the others. C's action was the signal to attack. Xiao Xian raised his saber. "Gan Xie, watch Robber 7. Don't let him die so easily." "As for you guys," Xiao Xian glanced at Mu Fa, Chu Li and the others. "Don't die so easily." Chu Li, Lu Zhai, Ci Du and Mu Fa, who had led the team through countless trials and tribulations, were speechless. The difference in treatment was a little frustrating. Although Xiao Xian had told them to protect themselves, they were the leaders of their respective tribes. How could they be willing to do that? How could Gan Xie take on 6 of them by himself? Although the moon wasn't very bright, with the combination of moonlight and starlight, with everyone's eyesight, they wouldn't go blind even if it wasn't as bright as the day. Gan Xie's night vision was far better than others, and even Ci Du, Chu Li and the rest had trained themselves to hunt at night after many hunts with the flaming horns. In the forest, the beasts wouldn't let them go just because they couldn't see well at night. Tonight's moon and starlight were much brighter than when they were in the forest. At least they weren't obstructed by the towering trees. Moreover, not all of the Bai people had good night vision. Their movements were also limited in the dark. After receiving C's signal, the 6 black-clothed men around him moved swiftly. They flung out the chains in their hands with brute force and agility. At the same time, there were threads that were not much thicker than a strand of hair. Together with the chains, these threads were easy to overlook. However, it was these threads that made the chains seem alive, releasing even more lethal force. If traps were to be described as interlocking, then these threads and chains were 2 of the most important factors for the Bai slave masters to set up their trap. This group of Bai people with a long history of slave trading were all experts in knots and rope. Therefore, they couldn't miss a single detail or movement. Robber 7 was so happy that he wanted to set off firecrackers. Ah! It's starting! It's starting! However, in order to minimize his presence, Robber 7 had to suppress his excitement. He no longer looked at the sky and pretended to be a philosopher. He observed the battle with great interest and looked for an opportunity to escape. He didn't want to stay. Even if Xiao Xian had no intention of handing him over to sea, Robber 7 didn't think he would have a good ending if he fell into Yan Zhao's hands. It was safer to escape. Mu Fa paid close attention to the strings and chains, silently calculating the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. He thought to himself, C's subordinates are indeed as frightening as the rumors say. Not only are they strong, their teamwork is flawless, and their ability to predict and analyze is also impeccable. Perhaps before they even make a move, they have already formed an intricate net in their minds, and the few of us are the prey that this net is trying to capture. Chu Li flicked his wrist. A round shield the size of 2 adult palms slid from his forearm to his wrist. He had asked Yan Zhao to help him get it made with Yan Zhao's new bronze. As the totemic patterns on Chu Li's body deepened, his entire body inflated. His palms and even his fingers grew in size. The round shield, which was originally slightly bigger, was now just right. Ci Du and Lu Zhai also picked up their weapons. Gan Xie was the only one who stood there barehanded. He didn't have any weapons on him. It was as if he couldn't feel the danger in front of him. Judging from his attire, he looked more like a leisure traveler. He was similar to many of the adventurers in the mainland. The chains plunged into the ground with a loud thud. The 3 men in black tugged at the chains. The arrowhead at the front of the chains had barbs, tearing up the soil and grass on the ground. The 3 men in black borrowed the force of the pull to leap forward. Clang, clang, clang. The chains seemed to have eyes of their own. They suddenly changed directions mid-air and chased after Chu Li and the others. Like a snake that had finally bared its fangs, it was about to hunt its prey. Once bitten, even if it was just a single bite, it would be close to hell. Both of Chu Li's feet stomped on the ground as he retreated rapidly. Looking at the sharp end of the chain that was less than half an arm's length away from his feet, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If his reaction had been just a little slower, or if he hadn't retreated far enough, his entire right foot would have been nailed to the ground. He glanced at Gan Xie from the corner of his eyes. He was still the same. Gan Xie's expression didn't change at all. He stood there silently like a lifeless stone pillar. Chu Li was impressed by Gan Xie's determination. Under such circumstances, he could still maintain his stone-like calmness. Chu Li couldn't help but wonder if Gan Xie would still be able to maintain his composure after being struck by the chains. That wasn't right. The Yanjiao people seemed to have told them that Gan Xie couldn't be killed. A chain escaped from the black-clothed man's hand. Like a long black snake under the night sky, it bared its poisonous fangs and went straight for Gan Xie, who was still standing there. To be exact, it was going for Robber 7, who was diagonally behind Gan Xie. When it came to other people, the Bai slave masters prioritized capturing them. If they couldn't capture them, they would kill them. Robber 7, on the other hand, was given the order to kill without mercy by C. That was why they could slowly toy with Chu Li and Gan Xie, but when it came to Robber 7, they would kill him at the first opportunity. Without using any tools, Gan Xie grabbed the chain that brushed past his scalp with his bare hand. The sharp spikes of the chain that was shooting towards Robber 7 stopped a step away from him. It was as if someone had grabbed it by the neck. The spikes at the front of the chain drooped down weakly. On the other end, the black-clothed man tugged at the chain. It wouldn't budge, but he didn't panic. Due to the structure of the chain, it was normal for it to be caught. Not only was he not worried, he even had a mocking smile in his eyes. His other hand moved slightly. At the same time, the other black-clothed man's chain shot towards Gan Xie like a snake. Gan Xie raised his other hand to block the attack of the second chain. However, at the same time, the chain in his hand seemed to have come alive. It struggled and twisted in an S shape. Suddenly, it pulled apart and wrapped around Gan Xie. Mu Fa noticed the situation at Gan Xie's side. He wondered if he should go over and help. However, Ci Do, who was already heading over to help, suddenly retreated away from Gan Xie as if he was avoiding the plague. Not only Mu Fa, even the black-clothed man who was chasing after Ci Do was surprised. What did Ci Do see? When Ci Do noticed Gan Xie's situation, his first reaction was to go over and help. After all, they were all on the same side. Moreover, Bai had one more person than them. If Gan Xie lost his ability to fight, their side would be at a disadvantage. However, just as Ci Do was about to go over, he saw a flash of red in Gan Xie's eyes. It was especially obvious in the darkness of the night. At that moment, Ci Do suddenly remembered that Gan Xie was different from them. The leader of Yanjiao had once told them not to get close to Gan Xie if they saw him in this state. Moreover, Ci Do had personally witnessed Gan Xie killing fearsome beasts during a hunt. Even now, he still had a lingering fear towards Gan Xie. Seeing Ci Do retreat, Chu Li and Lu Zhai seemed to have thought of something and stopped in their tracks. Robber 7, who was watching the battle with great interest, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but shiver. Gan Xie, who was bound by the chain, didn't panic at all. Instead, the strange red glow in his eyes expanded, as if it was about to overflow with viscous blood. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Finger bones that were half the length of an arm glowed with a metallic luster as they appeared in Gan Xie's hand. They were like sharp swords that had been unsheathed. Under the moonlight, they flashed with a frightening cold light. A strange roar came from his throat. Sound waves shot out from his long fangs, exploding and spreading in all directions. It was extremely deafening. The chains around Gan Xie's body creaked weakly, as if they were about to break in the next second. Sand-yellow flames emitted from Gan Xie's body. Everything around him became cold and dry. The grass under his feet quickly lost its moisture, as if it was being baked by the high temperature. It went from fresh green to withered in less than a breath's time. Robber 7, who was closest to Gan Xie, felt his face tighten as if it was about to crack. No amount of cold sweat could relieve it. The 6 men in black stopped abruptly as if their feet were nailed to the ground. Their arched eyebrows were raised as they looked at Gan Xie in shock. Their pupils constricted at the sudden turn of events. They were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. Which King tribe was this? Was this really a human? A half-beastman? No, not a half-beastman. They had captured so many half-beastmen as slaves, but they had never encountered a situation like this. This was not a half-beastman they were familiar with, nor was this a human they were more familiar with. Then what was this? A monster? It wasn't just the men in black who were stunned. Robber 7, who had been pretending to be calm, was also shocked. Every pore on his body was trembling from extreme uncertainty and suspicion. His heart was screaming for him to get away quickly. The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Time seemed to have slowed down. Clouds floated in the night sky, covering the 2 incomplete moons. Even the stars were hiding away in fear, appearing dim. The night was even darker. No one moved. The 6 men in black were probably guessing and calculating Gan Xie's threat level in their hearts. Robber 7 looked at the situation in front of him and broke out in cold sweat. Help! Another monster! He suddenly wanted to blow the whistle for help. Being demoted was better than losing his life. But, if he blew the whistle here, would the other robbers be able to hear him? In order to better escape with the chief's bone lock, Robber 7 purposely chose a route with fewer people. He was afraid that even if he blew the whistle until the end, no one would come to save him. At this moment, Robber 7 deeply understood one thing: you won't die if you don't seek death. Chapter 8:22. Robber Seven's eyes darted around as he heard the sounds of battle from Xiao Xian's side. He wanted to look in that direction, but his neck didn't seem to listen to him. Perhaps it was his natural reaction. He had to pay attention to the person closest to him who could threaten his life. For example, the strange man with sharp claws and fangs. Crack! Crack! One of the chains around Gan Xie's body was broken by the force of the pull. This seemed to have triggered a chain reaction. Crack! 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 A series of cracking sounds erupted in a short span of time. The metal chains around Gan Xie's body snapped into small pieces and scattered on the ground. The sand-yellow flame around Gan Xie's body seemed to have been pushed away by the shockwave. Countless pieces of grass that flew into the air dried up and fell to the ground like sand. Gan Xie's breathing sounded like a blood-soaked beast swallowing flesh and blood. The red glow in his eyes intensified. His hard and sharp finger bones were like 10 high-quality knives as they scratched against the chains. Sparks flew everywhere as they made a sharp sound. The 6 men in black weren't the only ones who were stunned. Even C.I. Du and the others who thought they knew Gan Xie better were stunned. How were these human fingers? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were made by a master craftsman. Otherwise, how could they create such an effect? Gan Xie firmly held onto the broken chains that were trying to escape. He pulled back and pulled one of the men in black towards him. Before the man could escape, Gan Xie's fingers were already around his neck. He looked like he was going to bite him, but before he could do so, he seemed to have smelled something unpleasant. He threw the man away in disgust, as if he was throwing away trash. The man in black who was thrown away crashed into the forest not far away. He broke a few tree trunks that were as thick as a man and fell to the ground. He slid across the grass for a long time before he stopped. He let out a painful cry and couldn't get up for a while. Gan Xie's blood-red eyes didn't even look at whether the man in the forest was dead or alive. He turned and looked at the other man in black. Looking at those blood-red eyes, the man in black's hand that was holding onto the chains trembled. After the clattering of the chains, there was a loud crash, followed by a short scream. C's eyes flickered, but he did not divert his attention to that direction. Instead, he sprinted towards Xiao Xian. His black robe fluttered as he dashed forward at high speed, shattering countless bits of grass that were flying in the air. The distance between C and Xiao Xian was not too far. C's movements were peculiar. Even though he was wielding a long-handled broadsword, he seemed to be gliding over the grass as if he was weightless. C waved his arms, the long cross-hilted biscuit that resembled a beast's fangs drew an arc in front of him. The sharp she blade seemed to condense a despairing aura of death, as if it wanted to cut off all life. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of Xiao Xian. The icy aura of the blade came straight at Xiao Xian. The sound of the wind breaking was strangely sharp, piercing to the ears. Xiao Xian did not try to hide. At a time like this, he had no intention of wasting time with his opponent. He did not want to test his opponent's strength step by step. Instead, he chose to use the Yanjiao style, direct, barbaric, violent, and the most effective way to attack. Highly active totemic power coursed through every part of his body. It was as if there were air bombs exploding on the surface of his body. His aura was violent and ferocious. Clang! The sound of metal clashing was endless. The sparks from the clash of blades were especially eye-catching in the dark night. Every time Xiao Xian took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet would sink with a thunderous rumble. The entire floor seemed to be trembling. The leaves blown by the wind, as well as the soil and grass that were thrown into the air by the tremors, were initially scattered like a drizzle. However, as the two sides clashed again and again, it quickly turned into a violent storm. The vibrant green that was torn apart, the withered yellow that was drained of moisture, and the brown soil that was stained with pebbles were all gloomy under the night sky. Along with the two men's movements, they were wantonly swept away and blown away. Xi's wide black robes were torn in many places. Every time he waved his hand, a hole would appear. Bam! Xiao Xian once again violently deflected the biscuit that came slashing at him. Xi used the momentum to retreat. In the brief moment of respite, Xi's eyebrows were raised like the other men in black. He panted quickly, his narrowed pupils flashing with suspicion. He no longer had the domineering aura that he had before the fight started. More and more, he felt an uncontrollable sense of danger. The strange man guarding Robber 7 was one of them, and the other was the Yanjiao man before him. If it was only a guess at the beginning, he was now completely certain of the man's identity. From the information he gathered, and from what he learned from Ji Fang, there was only one person who fit this man's identity: Yanjiao's grand elder, Xiao Xian. Even though Xi already knew from Ji Fang that Xiao Xian was a dangerous character, the information he heard and understood was far more profound than experiencing it firsthand. How could this tribesman be so strong? However, if that was all there was to it, then there was nothing to worry about. Under the continuous collision of their auras and strength, Xi felt that he had a rough grasp of Xiao Xian's strength. The moment they collided, Xi felt as if the bones in his entire arm were about to break. It was as if the one who collided with him was not a human, but a gigantic beast. The Yanjiao man, who was rumored to be as ferocious as a beast, was not to be underestimated. However, under such brute force, he could still win with technique. A calculating glint flashed across Xi's eyes, but in the next moment, he felt the skin on his back tighten. Before he could think too much, he realized that Xiao Xian was ready to attack again. Again? Xi's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. His chest and abdomen shrunk back as he retreated quickly to buy himself enough time. Then, he paused abruptly, his right foot stomping on the ground. His body moved with a twist of his waist and knees. With a flip of his palm, the cross-handled she was tossed into the air. Then, he reached out with both hands to grab the cross-handled she and spun it. In an instant, the cross-handled she spun like the blades of a meat grinder. Before the flying leaves could even get close, they were already shattered by the she's blade aura. Based on Xiao Xian's previous attack power, even if he could hurt Xi, Xiao Xian himself would have suffered more serious injuries. No one was willing to charge into a meat grinder. Those who charged into the spinning she would have been ground into minced meat. However, Xi's guess was wrong. Xiao Xian was even more ferocious than before. For a moment, Xi wondered if Xiao Xian, this tribesman, was an idiot. Xi thought his eyes must be playing tricks on him. He seemed to have seen a flash of white light under Xiao Xian's feet. It was fleeting and unclear, like a hazy fog that appeared and disappeared in an instant. Xiao Xian bent his knees slightly and lowered his body, like a beast ready to pounce on its prey in the forest. The next moment, he stomped his feet on the ground, flattening a large patch of grass that was above his knees. The entire patch of ground was lowered by a notch. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, was propelled by a powerful force. His body shot out like an arrow from a crossbow, bringing with it a strong gust of wind that could sweep a giant bear high into the air. His arm wielding the she's blade slashed out with the force of the impact. The air followed the movement of Xiao Xian's arm, setting off the sound of wind and thunder. The dirt and pebbles on the ground, the grass that was uprooted from the ground, and the flying sand from Gan Chie's direction were all pushed to the sides by the surging air waves. It was as if there was a ferocious beast roaring madly inside, chasing them away. There was no dodging, no other tricks. Xiao Xian directly and rudely rushed over. With every step Xiao Xian took, the ground shook. As Xiao Xian ran, the entire area began to shake. It made Xi feel as if he was stepping on waves, unsteady on his feet. He did not know how to exert his strength. Under such an attack, he could not even execute 30% of his movement techniques. Xi's heart skipped a beat. Xiao Xian's momentum had exceeded his expectations. The moment he saw Xiao Xian's explosive attack, he knew that he might not be able to block this round of attack. When a ferocious beast attacked its prey, anyone with a little bit of hunting experience would know how fast and powerful its charge was. Xiao Xian's charge was much stronger than those famous ferocious beasts in the forest. Feeling the power of the blade, Ci's heart raced uncontrollably. If there was enough light, one would be able to see that Ci's face was as pale as a sheet. Clang, clang, clang. Bam, bam. Two powerful forces collided. The entire floor felt like it was about to be lifted up. Chu Li, Ci and the rest felt an earthquake beneath their feet. The flying sparks converged into a glaring line of fire, breaking through the darkness. It was as if one's vision was being scorched. The power transmitted from the cross hilt to Ci's arms instantly spread throughout his body. His arms were numb. Tsk, tsk. Countless tears appeared on Ci's black robe. The torn fabric was swept high into the air before being shredded by the surging airflow. Ci was pushed back dozens of meters. His knees were already sunk into the ground. His hair, disheveled by the wind, stood up diagonally behind him. Before the cold sweat could form, it flew back along his forehead as soon as it appeared. The whirring sound of Ci's saber stopped. The saber in Xiao Xian's hand was like a steel bar stuck into a spinning fan blade, stopping its rotation. Bam! One of the horizontal bars of Ci's saber's cross hilt was cut off. The falling horizontal bar hit the ground with a dull thud. It was like a heavy blow to Ci's chest, making him want to spit out a mouthful of blood. Chu Li and the rest who had avoided the battle due to their inability to hold on looked at Gan Xie, who was still torturing Ci's saber. Then, they looked at Xiao Xian, who had chopped off the handle of the legendary Ci's saber, and fell silent. Forget it, all they had to do was protect themselves. They shouldn't add to the chaos. Although they didn't want to admit it, the reality was that Xiao Xian and Gan Xie were monsters on a different level from them. Suddenly, Ci's gaze froze. He nudged Lu Zhai, who was beside him, with his elbow. Speak. Lu Zhai was watching the battle anxiously. He was startled by Ci, so his tone was naturally unpleasant. Although there was no need for them to interfere, it was always good to be on guard. He didn't want to listen to Ci's nonsense. Look over there. Ci pointed at a spot not far behind Gan Xie. Lu Zhai was about to take a quick glance before retracting his gaze. However, when he looked over, his eyes widened in disbelief. He stared hard for 2 seconds before stuttering, Where is he? Chu Li and Mu Fa also looked over in confusion. They were equally stunned. All they saw was a cocoon-like ball of rope on the rock, where Robber 7 was placed. However, Robber 7, who was originally tied up inside, was nowhere to be seen. They thought that Robber 7 had hidden his head away, so when Gan Xie was almost done torturing Ci's saber, they took the opportunity to take a closer look. There was no one. It's empty, Chu Li exclaimed. Looking around, Robber 7 was nowhere to be seen. Gan Xie, who was in the midst of torturing Ci's saber, where was that little thief? Chapter 8:23. Of Ci's 6 men in black, only 3 were left. Half of them were gone and the remaining 3 were no longer actively attacking. They were all injured to varying degrees and were fully on guard. Their gazes towards Gan Xie were filled with undisguised fear. If not for Ci's presence and the lack of orders, they would have retreated. Gan Xie wasn't unscathed either. Sharp arrowhead-like objects pierced his body, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. Gan Xie didn't seem to notice it either and was unaffected. This put a lot of pressure on Ci's men. They didn't want to meet someone like Gan Xie. Had they known, they would have advised Ci not to attack them. The most despairing thing was when the opponent broke your best and proudest trick. Moreover, it was a direct attack without any other trick. It made them feel like they were about to break down. Wasn't Ci feeling the same way? The muscles on his arms were still twitching and the fingers holding the hilt were trembling. His black robe was in tatters and he looked like a beggar. Ever since C took over as the leader of C, he had never been in such a sorry state. However, his physical injuries weren't as severe as the psychological impact. There was a flattened protrusion where his fingers held the hilt. There used to be a horizontal bar there. The cross-shaped long-handled, she was a weapon modified, according to the writing of the character Min. The cross-shaped long handle symbolized the frame used to tie slaves. In the she organization, the guilty slaves would be tied to the cross-shaped frame and burned or punished in other ways. But now, the long hilt in C's hand was just a straight rod. Both ends were cut off by Xiao Xian. The vertical hilt was connected to a large she. From afar, it looked more like a scythe. C regretted it now. Why didn't he listen to Ji Fang? He shouldn't have attacked when he knew his opponent's identity. What was the most important thing in a war? Information. C's understanding of Xiao Xian was limited. The Yi family, who had suffered a great loss, would never divulge Xiao Xian's affairs to outsiders. After all, it was the family's shame. Not many in the tribe knew about it, let alone outsiders. As a result, Hui, who was used to being tyrannical, had his ambitions inflated. When he extended his claws to another continent and was about to make a big profit, he met a tough opponent and even made a move. Back then, when C extended his claws and fangs to another continent, this was what he had in mind. I'll capture a few of you as my slaves. Do you think you can just cross the ocean and attack me? In fact, Yanjiao really dared. Not only did he come over, but he also brought quite a number of people with him. Before he made his move tonight, C thought, I asked you guys to hand over Robber 7 but you guys refused. Don't blame me for making my move. Capture them all as slaves and kill anyone who resists. You won't even have the chance to regret it. However, reality proved that C was wrong again. He personally took action with his trusted subordinates who were experienced in capturing slaves. Despite having an advantage in numbers, he was defeated so badly that even his cross-shaped handle was sliced into a stick. This wasn't just because of Xiao Xian's strength. At the same time, it was also because of the knife in Xiao Xian's hand. During the fight, C saw a cloud pattern on the knife. However, the fight was too fast and Xiao Xian's attacks were too fierce. There wasn't enough light so C didn't have the time to take a closer look. However, with just one glance, C was certain that the knife in Xiao Xian's hand was made by one of the Gongjia family's craftsmen. Who in the Gongjia family made it? He had to go to the Gongjia family and ask for the truth. C's heart was filled with haze. His mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. The muscles on his face twitched and his expression contorted. His eyes were filled with hatred, but in the end, his rationality won out. He chose to retreat. If this were to continue, forget about his 3 subordinates, even C himself would be in grave danger. It was rare for the leader of the number 1 slave trading organization to choose to back down. Moreover, he was forced to back down. Retreat! C roared indignantly. Finally, C gave the order to retreat. The 3 injured men in black heaved a sigh of relief. Without further delay, they kept their chains and left. Finally, they didn't have to face that monster. C and his men came and left in a hurry. Chase. Ganqie asked. No need. Xiao Xian sheathed his knife and looked at the rock where Robber 7 had been. Only a rope cocoon was left there. He escaped. Ganqie blamed himself. He was too focused on tormenting Robber 7 just now that the slippery robber had escaped. He was too arrogant. He thought that after his body became like this, no one could escape his nose. Even if there was only the slightest trace of blood, he would still be able to smell it. No one could escape from him. However, Robber 7 had tricked him and successfully escaped right under his nose. Robber 7 had changed the smell of his sweat to avoid C's tracking insects. He had also changed the smell of his blood to avoid Ganqie's detection. Moreover, Robber 7 didn't change completely all of a sudden. Instead, he quietly changed while Gonxie was fighting with the men in black. Then, when no one was paying attention, he escaped at full speed. The inside of the rope cocoon was wet. Robber 7's sweat and blood were left on it. Hence, Gonxie could sense the scent of Robber 7 there all along. Robber 7 had escaped when no one was paying attention. What do we do now? Mu Fa asked Xiaoxian. Mu Fa, see I do, Chu Li Lu Zhai, you guys go back first and follow the team to the royal city, Xiaoxian said. You and Gonxie aren't going back? Are you guys going after that robber? See I do asked. No, Xiaoxian denied. We're not going after Robber 7. We're going after C. Xiaoxian's answer made Mu Fa's eyebrows twitch. He didn't ask any more questions. Although he was wary of Xiaoxian in the past, it wasn't as deep as it was now. To be able to force C to retreat was far beyond Mu Fa's expectations. At the same time, this also strengthened Mu Fa's resolve and confidence to work with Yanjiao. He was a wise and great leader of the long boat. Everything he did was for the tribe's benefit. He would choose any path that could make the tribe stronger and go further. Obviously, joining the Flaming Horn tribe was indeed a good choice. After Mu Fa and the others left, Gonxie cut open the rope cocoon that Robber 7 was tied up in. He carefully identified the scent inside, not missing a single detail. I was too careless. This was the first time Gonxie encountered such a situation. However, there wouldn't be a next time. If he met Robber 7 again, he wouldn't let Robber 7 use this method to escape. Not long after Xiaoxian and Gonxie left, the sky began to brighten. The sun replaced the moon and shrouded the land. Gradually, there were more and more noises. A group of traders passed by and looked at the scene in front of them cautiously. This wasn't the first time they had taken this route. Even if they couldn't remember every detail of the route, they could still roughly describe what it was like. However, the scene before them was completely different from what they remembered. Sand? Since when was there sand here? Did I remember wrongly? One of the travelers asked hesitantly. I don't remember there being sand here either. You're all right. The leader gripped his sword and walked towards the sand. Although it wasn't sand, it looked as if it had been affected by a natural disaster. It was a ghastly sight. This reminded those who had experienced the disaster of the natural disaster. They couldn't forget the horrible memory no matter how hard they tried. When they finally stepped onto the sand, the leader kicked something. He used his sword to push the sand away, revealing a dark arrowhead-shaped object. It's Bayan. This was a tool Bayan used to set up a trap. He looked around and found that there were many more of these things. It was definitely Bayan. Who has fought with the buyer here? Why didn't they have the time to collect the items? He looked up into the distance. The trees nearby had already withered. There wasn't a single leaf on the branches. The branches looked as if they would break at the slightest touch. In the distance, although there were still some trees with green leaves, they were more or less yellowed. When the wind blew, many leaves would fall. Taking a deep breath, the leader walked back to the group with wobbly legs. We need to be extra careful on this trip. Don't be careless. The leader's low and stern voice trembled slightly. No matter who Bayan had fought with to create such a situation, it wasn't someone they could afford to mess with. They would avoid them if they could. He was prepared to give up on this trip if he noticed anything amiss. On the other side, Mu Fa and the others caught up with the main group. Xiaoxian and Caesar went after C. He said to ask Caesar to keep an eye on the surroundings at night. Caesar can see things we can't. It's safer. Mu Fa relayed Xiaoxian's instructions to Gigu. The longboat tribe surrounded Mu Fa and asked, Boss, what's the legendary sea like? Is he very powerful? I heard that his knife is very strange. It was made by a long-dead Gongjia craftsman. No one else in this world can make it. Mu Fei's expression was complicated. He wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Chu Li and Ci Du were the same. They found it funny and depressing. However, when they thought about it, they felt much better because they were on the same side. Anyway, they weren't enemies. That was good enough. Lu Zhai chased away the people who surrounded them and asked Gigu in a low voice, "Do you still have it?" "Of course, I've been carrying it with me." Gigu opened the animal skin bag containing the chief's bone lock, intending to take out the item. However, as soon as his hand reached in, Gigu's expression froze. He took it out and took out a piece of broken stone. He immediately had a bad feeling. He flipped through the bag. Nothing? He took it out again. There really wasn't anything. Gigu opened the animal skin bag to its fullest and flipped it upside down. He widened his eyes and looked into the bag as if he wanted to scan every inch of it 100 times. However, the truth was that the item in the bag was really gone. One look at Gigu's expression and Lu Zhai knew what the result was. However, with the precedent of Robber 7 sneaking away under their noses, it wasn't so strange to see Gigu again. They were even surprised that Xiao Xian could predict this. "Before we came, Elder Xiao Xian said that if Robber 7 steals the item back, there's no need to look for it," said Lu Zhai. Unfortunately, without the chief's bone lock, they had one less bargaining chip. At the same time, Robber 7 was lying on a tree branch with his legs crossed. He looked proud and praised himself for being so smart. Not only did he manage to escape, he even managed to steal the item back. When he thought about Yanjiao going to the royal city, Robber 7 decided not to go to the royal city for the time being. That way, he wouldn't meet those Yanjiao people. Yes, he definitely wouldn't meet any Yanjiao people. After the hypnosis, Robber 7 started to doze off. He started dreaming about being one of the top 3 robbers. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.